All right. So today for a heartbeat episode, I've got James and Michael from Critical Compass in to have a conversation. And I've met James and Michael via Twitter and talked to them a couple of times over this, and we discussed getting onto a panel-esque type stream. And then when I finally met him in Edmonton at the Jasper event, or the Jasper Ave event, we talked a little bit more about what we were going to do, got something lined up. And I figured just because I hadn't had a full chance to break through the AstraZeneca phase 3 clinical trials, that'd be a good topic of conversation. So before we get into this, and as we're kind of letting more people populate into the channel, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have James and Michael introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they're doing with their podcast, and then we'll just kind of hop into some discussion. So, James, Michael, either one of you, take it away.
Oh, who's going to go first? I'll go first because I started talking first. Hey, Sheldon, thanks for having us. This is officially our first co-event. So we really appreciate you making some time for us. At Critical Compass, James and I just a couple of years ago, actually, we started talking about the idea of just sort of having a show where we kind of bounce ideas off each other. We're both pretty heady guys, and we like to think and talk about the contentious issues. And we don't really have we didn't really have a whole lot of people in our lives who we could talk about COVID in a negative way with. That was sort of what really precipitated it. We just didn't kind of have that support network, but we had each other, and that was kind of what really started it. Maybe James can kind of go into some more detail, but it's sort of that's what sort of started the idea of what we wanted to do on the Critical Compass, was to talk about contentious ideas in a forum that allowed us to sort of explore the ideas without too much not in a negative kind of way. So
yeah, the part of this is us. We want to kind of think in real time and kind of highlight, well, how do we get from A to B to C, and how conclusions out of what we're given. And if people go to our channel, they might notice like it's hard to point us exactly like on the political spectrum. We have a variety of views on issues, and that's part of the point. Is like we try to reject a bit of the tribalism of saying that, oh, if you fit into this group, you must view only in this way. Well, that's how we navigated through COVID. Is, well, we were told conclusions. We were told, here are the answers here's the way you're supposed to think. We specifically started thinking around that to try to come to our own conclusions. And a lot of the other kind of issues going on right now, especially when it comes to the kind of the neo-Marxist, the DEI within that is being integrated into pretty much every institution. We're very much key on having open dialogue, and if we can highlight the ways that we think, we're hoping that other people can maybe help foster some conversation and dialogue with their circles as well.
So kind of a combination of a little bit on the political spectrum, a little bit still on the COVID stuff. Now, when you guys first started getting going with your idea, how did you find putting these things up on, say, like YouTube? Were you guys censored at all? Did you guys get censored off of any other social media platforms, or was it just the initial stages and there wasn't enough people paying attention for that to really happen? Have you suffered any sort of setbacks with getting this going?
Yeah, it's hard to say how much of an effect. We know for a fact, because of the Twitter files, that a lot of these social media companies are intentionally deboosting certain topics, and it's hard to say because we're so new and we don't really have that big of a following just yet. It does certainly seem that when we talk about certain topics, those videos seem to get significantly less views than even what our kind of median is at the current moment. We've kind of hit the algorithm just right with a couple videos. We made a couple clips about Candace Owens, when she was fired from the Daily Wire over some, Israel-Palestine comments. And so that seemed to kind of just hit at the right moment. And we got, 10 times the amount of views we normally get. But yeah, it does. I don't know. Maybe James can kind of give some insight here. But to me, it feels like, depending on what we're talking about, it certainly seems to please or displease the YouTube gods, depending.
Yeah, I think we're choosing to see outright censorship because we're not even monetized. Therefore, we don't get videos flagged for specific issues. I think once you see more direct feedback on which videos are actively being demonetized. So that happens really quick, and people find out right away if something is too hot of an issue that way. But part of like we're growing content out there. It's hard to know. Like we try to edit our videos down. We try to have clear content. We try to have good thumbnails and descriptions. And for all like the quality of all of that, it seems like on YouTube right now, we're not growing as fast as maybe we had hoped. So know if that's just a saturation of kind of other podcasts, or if based on the type of content that we're highlighting and we're talking about, I don't know if YouTube is actively preventing sorts of conversations from maybe growing or being spread kind of organically through the homepage or the recommended videos. So it's hard to tell. And the other thing, even on Twitter, for like a fairly new channel and for only having a few hundred subscribers, for a while, we'd get a whole bunch of subscribers and they would just be porn bots. And what is happening is certain conversations, certain posts get hit with these porn bots because I don't know if it's bot farms or if there's people targeting certain keywords, but we already know that porn bots get, like, if you have a bots, it will get content deboosted. So it's hard to know if there's actually malicious actors farming out or targeting certain accounts or targeting certain keywords or any of that. So we did get hit with that early enough on, and we would see a rise in subscribers, it would drop, and it kind of bounced back and forth for a little while. So it's hard to know exactly what's going under the that's kind of restricting growth that way.
I think I can help you out a little bit with that. So there are certain trigger words that if you post them, then people will automatically hop on. But that's not to say that you're not already being followed by somebody else as well. So you put in a comment, and within 60 seconds, you'll find one of the porn bots likes that comment. If you go and wait 5 minutes, and this is no kidding, wait 5 minutes and block that person, then that'll be one less person that's targeting your Twitter feed. If you do it inside of 60 seconds, what you'll find is that they start multiplying. You'll see 2 more like the post, and then you got to block them. And then you'll see, 3 more, and then you got to block them, and they'll keep coming. So if you're doing it inside of a 60-second window, you just keep getting that one comment targeted. Second thing is when they do follow, your content on a word, and I'm going to say that it's not that tough to do a word, search for a specific word or a term that's being used. So when you post those words, you get one of those porn bots post in your feed. So what you can do is you open that up, you report it for sexual content, and then you have to hide the reply. So don't block them off of the same window. You report them, and then don't block them. Close that down, hide the reply, and then block them. So what it does is it takes it completely out of your feed. Otherwise, it can throttle your content. So what happens is when you have sensitive content on your Twitter feed, then it gets reported, and then that's where your boost actually comes down from. So it is an actual process, and there's a lot of us that have kind of learned the methodology of how to try and take care of some of these things. But generally, what I do is if I tweet something out, I set a timer for 5 minutes, and then I go back and check that tweet. I don't know all the words that are targeted, but I just go through them anyways in case I miss something, or It's like, oh, geez, I forgot what word I used. And I seem to find that there's a lot of people on YouTube that will say certain phrases, and that certain phrases are just really not taken too well by the algorithms or by whatever's scanning the YouTube channel. So those get flagged or those get deboosted, and or you get a warning, an outright warning from them. I'm still too new on YouTube for me to be monetized or even matter, and I only put it on there just so I can actually have people show up and throw some comments. Which is kind of cool because, we can get in, have a live conversation, and versus Zoom where we've got, 50, 60 people or, 100 people that are in the chat and everybody's kind of struggling. And you hear somebody who's with their, pets in the background. They don't know how to mute their phone. And, it's a little bit easier to do this. And then people can kind of chime in through either Twitter or through YouTube. So that's a little bit about what I know about the analytics.
That's interesting. That, yeah, we got to really... maybe we'll get a written version of that from you to reference, because it's wild to me that, like, this seems like something that should have been dealt with. Like if you pay for a blue check mark, you shouldn't have to know, spin around in a circle 3 times and make sure the moon is full, and then if you do everything in the proper order, like, you shouldn't have to do those things in order for your content not to be deboosted by porn bots. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think for every countermeasure that they come up with, somebody just finds another loophole and another way to exploit. I mean, the porn bots were supposed to be all but gone. Yeah. And what I'd noticed is, I think it was about a month ago, Elon said, if you, unblock all your blocked list, and, it'll pay off for you. And it's like, well, no, like, the majority of the people that I have in my block list are the porn bots. And I'm not going to go back to doing that, because then they just, they dogpile on you if they still exist, and then you're ending up with the same problems. Instead of blocking 1 or 2, now you have to block 30 of them, and going through the process, especially if you post something off of a mobile device, then you've got to go through, and it's a pain in the ass to get it sorted out. I work mostly off my PC, so it's not a big deal, but the odd time here and there, I notice them when they pop up. It's just not as easy for me. I got to put on my granny glasses and blow up my screen, and me looking all crazy at my phone, and it's like, well, what am I looking at here? So yeah, no, it is a pain in the ass. And like I said, I just think it's a big part of, the more that they try to do, the more that somebody else counteracts it. And I think we see a lot of that even inside of government, where the more rules that are put in place, the more issues that are coming out of that. So I know you guys are in Alberta. You're both in Edmonton, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So, like, one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and I know we're going to be talking about the injections, but since we're, kind of in a political state, and, we're both in the province, we kind of understand a little bit about what's going on. So a big part of the stuff in Bill 20 that I like is that they're regulating the amount of money that unions can give to individual candidates on a municipal level. So what we'd seen a couple of large players, through the unions, these PACs that they form, throw together and basically buy seats on council. Now they had, basically a candidate running in every constituency, from what I understand. Some they might have had 2 that they were sponsoring. And what was the name of the group? If I think of it, I'll bring it up. But basically, they openly bragged about having put people onto city council. And then in the same video, and it was a Muppet video, they openly said, and if they don't, support what we're saying, we'll find somebody for the next election. And I mean, that's what constituents are saying. That's not, we don't all have hundreds of thousands of dollars to be throwing at candidates. And, basically our in Calgary, the issues that we're facing now are because we have, a predominantly leftist leaning group, 8 of them, the Hateful Eight, which were placed, including Mayor Gondek, by union money. And now we see stuff like the blanket rezoning going on. So I know that there are some parts of Bill 20 that the UCP has released that some people aren't too fond of, and that's okay. I'm not too fond of them either, because if the shoe's on the other foot, will I like the outcome of them? Probably not. But, again, it's one of those things. If we're not putting in some rules to at least help counter some of these things, then we're going to continuously struggle with, our municipalities being bought up, and then that moves into a provincial level, and then that moves into a federal level, and then we see, what Eastern Canada looks like right now. There's more people lining up for handouts than there's people wanting to actually work that have to pay for those handouts, and it becomes a really big situation. We see the state of Canada right now, and it's not a pleasant place to be in. So, yeah, Bill 20, not the greatest thing. Yeah, having to block porn bots, not the greatest thing, but they are some of the system that we have to live in, and we have to appreciate, right?
Yeah, and that does also kind of explain. I have noticed there are shifts in these kind of rural municipalities that are becoming more and more leftist, quite progressive, quite woke. More so in the last 10 years, it's been quite a big shift. And if there are unions influencing some of these municipalities, that doesn't surprise me at all. That would be one explanation for the shift in those, because they have been historically conservative, just by nature of it being rural. So.
Yeah, and I mean, Alberta, the largest conservative province in Canada, but we did see a lot of that. And I'm going to take you back to the last provincial election with Premier Smith. So when we were going through the provincial election, they basically had a 10-month fear and smear campaign leading into the election. It was all sponsored by union money, and from unofficial sources, I get that to be about $10 million is what the unions put to flip 11 seats inside of the province. And while the Conservatives still have a majority inside of the House, what it basically does is it makes sure that all of them have to be there throughout Ledge in case there is any voting going on. Whereas, if we had a larger majority, we could have, more issues tended to, while still be able to, maintain some control and rule inside of the province. So there's a lot to it. Politics is a difficult place to be. At the Edmonton event, did you guys have a chance to meet some of the members of Legislative Assembly that showed up? I believe there were 16 of them that came out.
I didn't personally, but I also had to leave a little early. I think James might have, though.
Yeah, I think it was Todd
cool.
McClellan.
Okay.
He was, yeah. I did get a chance to talk to him. He's mentioning kind of what they're doing to try to keep some of these. I think it was they were using infrared to monitor some of the wildfires. He was describing what they have in place for that. So it was great to even just like meet him, talk with him, and kind of see what's on his mind, what he's focused on. So
it's cool that anyone showed up at all, really, right?
Well,
16.
I mean, we kind of 16. We work with for the Calgary event, we worked with Eric Bouchard, and he's the one that's going to be hosting the Injection for Truth in Calgary on June the 17th. Should be a pretty exciting event. So I'd met with Eric, and we had actually two. So there was Eric and another guy. Forgot his name. It'll come to me. Told you I'm terrible with names. So we only had the two MLAs at the Calgary thing, and so I met with Eric afterwards, and he said, we should do another one of these in Edmonton, but we got to do it in summertime before Ledge lets out. And what I'll do is I'll invite as many people as want to come. So at the Calgary one, he said, we might even have somebody from the NDP show up. It was like, great, if we can continue to have these conversations, that's fine. So I think he extended the invite to all the UCP and even included some of the NDP MLAs. We just didn't see any of them show up that I know of. I believe it was 100% of the UCP and the 16 that did show up. But the idea is to get these people out into a casual setting where it's not a, pay $50, come listen to me prattle on about something, and never really get to know you. Like the events, these guys were milling with the crowds, and you got a chance to meet with them, have a beverage with them. I just thought it was incredibly cool. And the idea is if we can get more people out, get more of the members of Ledge out, then people start to get a little bit more comfortable with the topics. They start to get a little bit more engaged with the politics, and the apathy that we're seeing right now, it needs to be bowled over. And I think this is the best way of doing it. Attending the town halls that we're seeing, having these guys out for a beverage, keeping in contact with them. There are certain things that, if I have a question about something, I'll email it over to Eric, and I'm not going to say I get an immediate reply. And I'm not saying that I have any power to swing anything, in the ledge. But I've been in contact with Shane Getson from Lac St. Anne, Eric Bouchard from here in Calgary, Lougheed. And, at their time, they're able to either send me the information that I'm looking for, which is, just basically a question, or point me in the right directions, which is what I appreciate. Throughout the whole COVID thing, when we started reaching out to counselors, and I was writing letters through my Substack and having other people send them out to their members of parliament or their members of legislative assembly, and we would get absolutely zero back, like no responses. I'd gotten a couple from my MP, but he's a backbencher, and he just basically regurgitated party line or story of the day, and I'd say, no, you didn't even read what I wrote. Your reply is nowhere near answering the questions that I'm asking, and you're not paying attention. At least he tried. So after I'd responded to him a little bit frustrated, and the last time, I don't think he'll even walk down my block come the next provincial election if he decides to rerun.
I think I'd be a ghost.
Like how much data we've had, even in 2020. And for example, you had the Great Barrington Declaration. Like we didn't have an absence of data showing kind of the potential harms of lockdowns or the actual issues with some of the case numbers. All that was there, and it wasn't a lack of data that prevented more conversations like within our elected officials. I think it was a lack of it being either what still wasn't a thing to talk about, and or there was risks, or they would have been ostracized. And I think when there's conversations happening, we are slowly opening this window of dialogue and getting it more comfortable for our elected officials to address some of these issues. And we still need to just keep on widening it. Our data, obviously, to support that, it becomes harder and harder to play the games and hide away some of these truths. But it is interesting that even with the data that did exist back in 2020, it took so much to even get these small steps forward. It's a crazy thing.
Well, and on that note, you look at, like, I find it absolutely wild that you didn't even get a response from any NDP MPs that you offered the invite to. I mean, like, I don't know if you're familiar, Sheldon, with Peter Boghossian. He's a philosopher. He has a YouTube channel and has a podcast, and he does a thing called Spectrum Street Epistemology, where he'll go out on the street and he'll just like ask people their the strength of their opinions on certain things and what it would take to get them to move from one side of an opinion to another, or even just soften or strengthen an opinion. We reference him a lot on the channel because we're big fans, but he constantly says that he finds it very, very difficult to get people who identify as liberal or left-wing in some way to have a discussion about any contentious topic. So he's overrun with people from the right who are willing to discuss issues and are willing to have, conservatives willing to have discussions about, maybe more liberal issues, but he finds it very difficult the other way. So that is a big problem that we run into. And what you do with putting these events on and with, casting a wide net and being as welcoming and open as you can be, that's so important, because it is really difficult to even start these conversations. And I think when people get into them, you find that, most people aren't as hard and fast about what they think they believe as they might think they believe. And it's much more pleasant of an interaction than, maybe people who are on opposing sides of an issue might think it would be going into it.
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree with you, but I mean, people were even in 2020, they were pretty stuck on the mandates and the lockdowns and the safety and their own protection, and that was around the same time that everybody was claiming that they were immune compromised. Oh, I've got a bad immune system. I mean, there were people coming out of the woodwork with that. It's like, well, how are you? Oh, I just get really sick sometimes. Oh, geez, that's terrible. It's tragic.
I got the flu once.
Yeah, no. So when you seen all the people that were making these claims, some of them were pretty stringent, and I got into it with a lot of doctors on LinkedIn. There was a couple, pretty serious. One was like the number one posting doctor on LinkedIn, and we would battle back and forth. And I'd basically call him an idiot every day, and then he'd have a lot of his people that worked at his hospital or other doctors. They'd all try and hop into his defense and stuff, but they were pretty weak at best. And then he eventually banned me, so or blocked me.
Yeah.
But it was like one of those things. I've now got, excuse me, the Liberal leader for Alberta. He'd commented on a couple of my posts over the last week or so, and I said, sounds like you got some, strong opinions there. I'd love to host you on a live stream. And he goes, yeah, maybe we should meet for a beer first. I said, okay. So, let's come up with a time, meet for a beer. So apparently I'm going to be going for a beer with the Liberal leader for the province of Alberta. And, I think we have one Liberal, or is it two Liberal MPs for the entire province. There's George, the Porch Pirate Chahal, and maybe one guy, Randy Boyson in Edmonton, right?
Yeah.
He's Liberal.
Edmonton West. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. If I get out for a beer with this guy and I can convince him to come on to a chat, I think it'd be a great, topic of conversation. He said some pretty inflammatory things inside of his feed, so I didn't really look because I could give a shit less what somebody said 1,000 years ago, unless they're like Nenshi or some of these other guys that said, oh, we never took away your rights. Well, here's where you took away your rights. Here's what you actually said. So, I'll go through it for that, but others actually went through and picked apart his stream and he seemed pretty extreme, like, do the responsible thing, or, we shouldn't tolerate your type people. And, those sort of comments I find, I'd like to sit across the table from somebody and just hear what they have to say about that. Because knowing what we know now, all the data that's come out, we're seeing a lot different things. Some of us seen this a lot earlier on. I'd seen it before the jabs were really opened full bore in Canada through the Israeli data with Pfizer, and then started watching through the United States with the VAERS. And by the time they got to Canada, that wasn't a big part of what made my decision for me. Is the data that was released by the province in 2020 on COVID is inside of my specific age group, so a 10-year window of 40 to 49. There was a sum total of 20 people that had supposedly died from COVID. Now, 94% of the people that died from COVID had multiple comorbidities, right? And then on the comorbidity side of things, the province of Alberta left out obesity. So diagnosed comorbidities means that they're already taking a prescription or some sort of treatment or some sort of recommendation. Being obese, they may have had these conditions, but just never got, diagnosed. So what I was basically looking at was, there was quite possibly 2 people in the entire province out of the 20 that died in my age category that, and actually, no, it boiled down to one person in my age group that had no listed comorbidities. Between 2 sexes, between how many thousands of people that had caught COVID. So when you look at that and you say, well, am I really at that big of a risk? And, I'd kind of sorted through a lot of this a long before that, even talking about just how the virus works and how the immune system works. And again, on LinkedIn, I was connected with a lot more doctors, a lot more healthcare providers. And, we could openly discuss things on LinkedIn or through private chats. And, they would lead me into a lot of information. When I started getting out into the public, then I'd started meeting some of the nurses and healthcare practitioners. They would say, I can't really go online with any of this, but here's what you want to look at. And it was like, okay, cool. So then I could actually use, their suggestions and then either go through the provincial or the federal data provided by Health Canada and find exactly what they were talking about. It's not so much a matter of seeing what you're seeing. It's a matter of being able to explain it. And I think one of the biggest things, and I'm just going to give you an example, and I don't have anything opened up right now, but one of the biggest things is if you'd noticed in the higher age groups, the 60 plus, I think it was actually the 80 plus age group, is that you'd see a number like, for ICU admissions, you'd see a number of 12 ICU admissions on the week. And then you would see 36 deaths. So it's like, well, why do you have 36 people that died and only 12 were admitted to ICU? And the reason that is because there's this thing called goals of care. So we're all familiar from watching TV with something that's called a DNR, right? The Do Not Resuscitate Order. And it actually exists inside of Canada, but it's under goals of care. So you have these 3 levels of care where you're basically on, everything, some stuff, or absolutely nothing. You're on comfort, you're on some medications, but inside of these certain levels, they basically come to the conclusion that you're too sick to be helped. So if you do actually pass on, it's probably not a good idea to try and revive you. Now, have you guys taken a first aid course?
Yeah, I used to be a lifeguard.
Okay, so you've taken the
Yeah,
class.
and chest compressions are pretty violent, all things considered.
Yeah, so through the class, it just seems, you're kneeling on the floor with like a half a stump, a dolly or whatever, and you're doing the chest compressions on that, and it seems pretty Mickey Mouse. But when my mom was in the hospital in 2020, there was actually somebody that had collapsed. They were in the hospital, and there was like I don't know if it was a nurse or a doctor or whatever, basically straddling this guy and hammering on his chest. Like, it was one of the most violent things that I'd ever seen inside of a hospital. So, I mean, I can definitely appreciate that there are people with certain conditions that, just may not want to, be in that condition. And even for my mother, when I looked at her, they said, she's got lung cancer. If this does happen, we're recommending that, we don't actually do that. But inside of that same thing, when you sign this, you don't want the resuscitation. It also limits your ability to go into intensive care. So you also don't get ICU admission either. And then
So
when you actually broke down the rest,
scary. Like these numbers of like intensive care versus that, they sound scary until you unpack them and then a little bit further, like what you're doing, and there's more context that you're not getting when it's just a headline.
and that's exactly right. They failed to bust it out for anybody. So then when you took and realized that people weren't dying in the streets, they weren't dying in their houses, they weren't dying in ICU. You had to appreciate that a lot of these people with multiple comorbidities were end of life, and they were actually dying in hospices. So that's where the with or from really kind of comes into play. Yeah. They died with COVID. They just happened to test positive on, and even in early 2020, there were speculative cases. And if you look at the metrics and the statistics out of Quebec, where they had, 50.5% of the COVID mortality for the province of Quebec compared to the rest of Canada. So you take the population of all of Canada minus Quebec, they had 50.5% of the 2020 COVID-associated mortalities. But they weren't testing people. There was no test to be had. They were abandoning people, if you guys remember. And then they were also giving end-of-life drugs. So they executed about 4,000 people. And I mean, there was plenty of headlines, and you can go back and research that. And I've done the same breakdowns on the same things. These people were left to die. They were considered COVID mortalities. And it's like, if you guys have to amp up the numbers like that, there's a lot more going on than what we're actually seeing. So we're about a half.
Remember the? Sorry, Sean.
Go ahead.
Nope. Do you remember the case in Alberta of that 14-year-old kid who had brain cancer and
the brain cancer one? Yeah.
Yeah, and they tried to call it a COVID death until his sister went to social media and reamed them out for it. It was that was one of the most disgusting things I ever saw.
Yeah, but the strange thing about that is they never removed the death from the COVID-19 panel or from the dashboard.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, and what happened with that is it actually coincided for the, I believe the age group was from 12 to 19.
Yeah, it was perfect for that demographic that they wanted, right?
Yeah, so I think the jab was 2 weeks short of that. They needed a death. They needed, to bang some drums. So they found a child, and maybe he tested positive with COVID. The thing about it is when I'd watched Leighton Gray and Jeff Rath go through it with the province, one of the things on PCR testing, which we all heard about, was this thing called cycle threshold.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you set this thing to too high of cycles, then what you're left with is a lot of people that are coming up as false positives. So inside of the province, and this is what I learned through this court case, the Ingram court case, is that they didn't have a consistent cycle threshold. And they actually put a witness on the stand to say, oh, no, this is the reason that we did that. We didn't want to have consistency. We wanted to make sure that we were finding the right amount of cases. And then you come to learn that COVID can still be tested inside of your body as a virus for over 100 days, but be dead. So
my
how many
understanding is,
go ahead.
When they're doing the PCR test, are taking a sample and they are amplifying it, and they're looking for genetic material, and they're amplifying that. So a fragment of can be amplified, and when you run enough cycles, you are just doubling and doubling and doubling. And we know from the creator, Kary Mullis of the PCR test, the creator of the PCR test, he even stated that if you run enough cycles, you find a fragment of pretty much anything in any sample.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. But the other thing is not only could they, find these samples, is they didn't know if they were alive or if they were dead. So the only way to conclusively tell if somebody's got live virus is by running a culture. So, instead of the testing swab going into the PCR, or, you stab your brain and wipe it out. I don't even know what the home test kits looked like, because I've never run a test. I've never had a COVID test. But you go through this, you jab your brain with a Q-tip, whatever. You run it through the solution. You put it on the little pregnancy looking test, and that's supposed to determine
exactly what it looks like.
like if you got the row or not, right? But instead of doing that, if you took that same brain stab with the Q-tip and you put it into a medium, and then you let the culture grow, after a few days, you could see if you had live COVID, or if nothing grew, then it was dead COVID. Well, they never did that in Canada. So all the people that they attributed mortality to COVID, they tested ineffectively with the PCR testing. They overused the cycle threshold, so to create false positives. And three, they didn't know if it was live or dead virus. Now, they'd managed to come to a point to convince, especially the vaccinated people, a lot of people in the vaccinated camps, that whether you were sick or not, they could catch COVID from you. So you were automatically a suspect just by not being vaccinated. Well, no, I had COVID 6 months ago. Or no, I had COVID 3 months ago. No, I got over COVID 2 weeks ago. I don't have any more, COVID in me, no more live virus. And they would still deem you as a threat to their personal safety. So, it was, again, it's incredible to see, the lengths that people were willing to go through and what they would believe from the continuous drumming, the psyop that was being fed to us through the media from our healthcare providers and politicians. It was complete lunacy.
Yeah, it really highlighted for me there's a concept of freedom to and freedom from. And people, when they talk about their liberties and their rights, oftentimes people get freedom to and from kind of mixed up. And I know a lot of people during COVID, they really started to believe that they had a freedom from ever being around somebody who was contagious with an illness. Like they really truly thought, they believed that they had the freedom from ever being exposed to anything that might harm them, rather than what we should have been doing is emphasizing the freedom to exist in the world under your own evaluation of what you want to, the type of risk you want to subject yourself to. People started to believe that they had rights of never catching an illness, an especially catchy illness, no matter what it is. And that was wild to see. Like I'd never encountered anything like that before.
And that was, and I think that's where the government and the healthcare providers really failed on this when they went into mandates. Because what they did is they took a bunch of people, told them with the vaccination, they're only going to be around other vaccinated people, so they're not going to get sick, and let them travel to other countries, which is where we'd seen the Omicron wave come from. So, basically everything past Delta was 100% brought in to the country through vaccinated people. And you don't, if the vaccines ever worked, you don't get strains of COVID like they said, Omicron could, get past the defense mechanisms of the original jabs. You don't get a virus that can train itself to evade a vaccine in an unvaccinated person. The idea of that is stupid.
Yeah. You're never supposed to vaccinate during a pandemic. Like that was Bhattacharya talked about that in the Gray Barrington Declaration. Like that was known. Like we had a COVID, or we had a pandemic response, and one of the first points of it is you do not vaccinate in the middle of a pandemic, because exactly like what you said, all you're doing by doing that is encouraging the proliferation of variants.
Well, and the other thing it did is, people don't know what an immune response is. But everything that you'd read on the list of adverse events, and we'll go through some of that stuff, is an immune reaction. So an immune reaction in your body will respond somewhat the same to whether you stubbing your toe, you getting a virus, or you being poisoned, right? Now, depending on the severity of that injury is depending on how much of your immune system is now going to be taxed. If you suffer from a chronic condition and you further weaken your immune system during a pandemic where your body has never been a victim to a new respiratory virus, you're setting up a perfect storm. So, I mean, like I said, Jay's right. And I was actually supposed to have Jay on a live stream call, and then he had something better to do, and now he's not responding to my text. So I love Jay. Jay's a great guy. Jay was actually one of the guys that I'd seen testify in the Ingram case with Leighton Gray. And, the idea behind him was absolutely correct. So if somebody is under suspicion of, let's call it C. diff, which is a condition that causes rampant diarrhea. If you have C. diff and you're inside of the hospital, what happens is they quarantine you as a patient. So everybody has to wear gowns and blah, blah, blah. And, you have to, and my mom was tested for this a couple of times. This is how I know it. In the Royal Alex, the hospital of death in Edmonton. So she was tested for this. Oh, it is a horrible place. She was tested for this. And before they'd got the test back, they'd make us, put on the full gowns and masks and gloves and all that crap. And then if you went out, smoke a dart or grab a drink of water or have a bite of lunch or whatever, when you went back in, like you'd be in and out for 60 seconds. You had to take the clothing off as you were leaving the room and then put on new clothing as you went into the room. So it's completely, ludicrous. And to think that we could take the idea of quarantine on an individual patient level like that and quarantine the entire country of people, only designating some people as essential and allowed to leave their houses. It was, it made no sense.
That's without addressing some low hang. So we know the immune system it's not just a measure of like vaccines a person's taken or not. Your immune cells are affected by, let's say somebody has insulin resistance. And a lot of this is where we're looking at the number of people in these who are obese. They have insulin resistance, and that affects every cell in their body, including immune cells. And we had early in 2020 showing if you increase it, if you get better controlled sugars, outcomes improve in people. And there was even studies suggesting that, well, if you give somebody a low carbohydrate or a ketogenic diet in the hospital, you can comes through those mechanisms, through the anti-inflammatory effects of ketones, etc. There's that side of things. There's the vitamin D. There's all these things that are low or no cost measures that could have been attempted, could have been implemented. The vitamin D, to low hanging fruit, that one baffles me. Like, you cannot attribute that to just accidentally missing, or just, you think they would throw everything at a problem like this if it was so dire. Like, you'd spend a few $1 million and hand out vitamin D to every Canadian as a precautionary measure. Like, you think these things would have been these low hanging fruits.
Yeah, and I mean, let's extend on that. So insulin resistance just means that you have more fat mass than you have muscle mass to support it. So when you looked at the people that were the highest at risk, they were the elderly. And it's not that they're, and if you start noticing how there's a shifting in type 2 diabetes in the elderly, what you notice is it's because their muscles have shrunk where their fat mass has maintained. So they basically do have a form of insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is basically your fat cells are too full in order for them to pack more stuff into. So you have to basically force feed more insulin into your body or regulate your blood sugar. So inside of your body basically runs like a hybrid hybrid vehicle. What's stored inside of your muscles is something called creatine or phosphocreatine. I'm sure you guys have heard of creatine if you've ever hit the gym, or it's what a lot of athletes take. So phosphocreatine, 95% of it is stored inside of your muscles. 5% of it is kind of free floating inside of your, the rest of your body. And the importance of creatine inside of the body is through a process called creatine kinase, is it upregulates adenosine diphosphate into adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is what's used to power every cell and your immune system. So as we get older and our muscle mass drops, what happens is elderly people, they don't have as good of teeth. They don't consume the same amount of foods. They hear about all this. Well, you shouldn't have too much meat. You should have, more fruits and vegetables. And then they're given a diet. And if you go into the hospitals or if you go into the long-term care facilities, and you'll see this, and it's running rampant, is you'll see an elderly person having their breakfast, which will be a piece of toast with margarine on it, a little bit of jam, and a glass of juice. And they say, that's a healthy breakfast for you. Well, that's no different than having a donut and a fucking Coke for breakfast. When you look at the sugar load on that. So what they're doing, and you talked a little bit about this, is that's an inflammatory set. The sugars will actually inflame conditions. So if they have something going on inside of their bodies, they're worsening the fire. They're weakening their immune systems even further. So consumption of meats and proteins, whether it's through keto or carnivore, a reduction of inflammatory foods, sugars and carbohydrates, your grains, breads, donuts, pies, pierogies, spaghetti, lasagna, all the things that I love to eat that I can't eat anymore. Yeah, all the good stuff. I can love all that stuff. I can't eat it. When people consume a lot of that, and when you look at the hospital food, what people get inside of those things, it's all laden with sugar. The only thing is they accommodate some of that through portion control, so that they can give you really quick, cheap energy through a sugar-loaded yogurt and a piece of toast, or a little with some jam that'll satiate the elderly, instead of trying to give them or get them to gnaw on a piece of steak or a pork chop, right? So there's a little bit of simplicity to it, but again, as we get older and as our bodies start to break down, as we're consuming less proteins, we're not continuously replenishing those the phosphocreatine stores inside of our muscles. We go through a condition that's called sarcopenia. That sarcopenia is where our bones get a little bit more brittle, because our body's actually catabolizing the proteins inside of our body in order to create creatine to replenish our immune systems. Does that all make sense? Yeah. Yeah, no, I dove into that. Go ahead.
Well,
you said that once or twice before, we can tell.
Yeah. So, I like that you're breaking that down, because it's worth noting that, well, looking at these studies, even these like the AstraZeneca trials and everything, we have to take into account the individuals who are also in these trials. A lot of them are metabolically unhealthy and suffering from these same kind of things. So I'm always curious, like, how does that warp some of the information in cells as well? Because you are like the most ideal cases of what state people are in. But I wonder if we should dive into some of the data.
Yeah, no, let's have a look at it, because we can actually start to go through some of these things that you're talking about here. So I'm not going to read through the presentation, because that'd be boring. And I posted it on Twitter, and everybody's got a copy of it from my Substack and from my YouTube feeds. It's inside of the comments. If you haven't found it, feel free to have a look. Go through my post feeds. You'll find a link to the PDF, and you can download it. Give it a quick read, or just use it for reference. But I'm not going to read it all out. I'm just going to go through some of the highlights. So when we looked at the number of people that started, and this was on the AstraZeneca, not the supposed saline, and the study specifically says it uses saline, but there are some things that I question about that. I'm just going to go through the basics on what we've seen on the AstraZeneca side. So the big thing here is they started off with 21,634 people. These people went through a 14-day screening process, and from that, they brought it down to 21,583 participants. By the end of the trial, and you can see it right here, only 16,099 people actually completed the 2-year trial that they were supposed to. So in that, there were 62 people that died, 55,000 people that they lost touch with, almost 2,000 people withdrew consent, saying, I don't want you bothering me anymore. So, I mean, like inside of that, and I'm sure this happens in clinical trials all the time where people will sign up for it. Their lives or their livelihoods change. They have to move away. Something happens inside of their family. So you're going to see some of these people fall off, right? But inside of this, when they looked at the patients that they were going to use, where are we here? I don't think I actually included it. What they had is the people that they started off with, the 21,634, they weren't all fully healthy people. They were healthy or they had stable conditions. So they're not testing the vaccines on sick people, but inside of the stable conditions, they put a kind of a bit of a disclaimer in there saying that they were still at higher risk. So these people had conditions that were stable, but they were still at higher risk. To me, that sounds like they're testing it on sick people. What does a stable condition inside of a sick person mean? And is that the reason that we've seen some of the large fall off here? Or is that the reason that we've potentially seen, some of the other injuries that we'd seen throughout the trial, or the 62 people that died? And for that matter, there was actually more than 62 people that died. And I do break that down. Does that kind of answer your question though, James, on, who was being used? And
yeah,
kind of goes through.
Kind of touches on that.
So when we started looking at the, through the rest of the study that they'd put out here, we have a number of different terms that are thrown around here. We have AEs, which are adverse events. We have SAEs, which are severe adverse events. We have the AESIs, the adverse events of special interest, and the MAAEs, which were the medically attended something thing or rather. And it really upsets me when they do this, because I mean, I don't mind if they're going to do something by reducing some to less severity and some to extreme severity or more severity. But when they start to break them down to a number of different things, and then they start to, fudge the data around that, it gets a little bit troubling to see what's actually going on. But from this, what we're looking at is that 21,587 people took the vaccines, and a total of 8,700 people, 8,771 people were injured by these. But how many people finished the study again? Do you guys remember what that number was? There was only 16,099 people that finished the study. So
how many people who didn't finish the studies, how many of those people had zero adverse events? We don't know.
We don't know. So we know that this number is wrong, because it's not the number of subjects analyzed, because that number should be 16,099. And if that number's wrong, then there's a possibility that some of those adverse events would have went along with it. Were they the serious ones? Were they the minor ones? Were they the major ones? We don't know.
Yeah. Such an adverse event that they withdrew themselves from the study, perhaps.
And we'd seen the same thing inside of the data in the province of Alberta, or not the province of Alberta, but was done through a group called Canvas. So Canvas is a federally funded group. From Alberta, we had it was the province of Alberta, Alberta Health Services, and the University of Calgary that were conducting these studies on people that had adverse events. And what you'd notice is the people that enrolled for the study after the first jab, there was a lot of people that didn't do it after the second. And even if you look at the number of people on Health Canada's page, it says, how many people took their first jab. But then they don't show how many people actually finished or got into the fully vaccinated, Quebec changed their statistics to mean from 2 jabs to 3 jabs. So they started monkeying with the data there again. But all the people that they considered unvaccinated were the people with, supposedly no jabs. And there's a large number of people that took the first jab, couldn't get the second jab. And even if we look at MLA Shane Getson, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with who he is, but he's one of the members of Legislative Assembly for the province of Alberta who was harmed after his first vaccine. So right now, a member of Legislative Assembly is still not fully vaccinated. And this is troubling because, inside of the province, if he was in a car accident and required a new spleen or a new kidney or, whatever that looked like, and he went in, he's still mandated to take, to be fully vaccinated in order to get that kidney transplant. So we potentially have a member of Legislative Assembly who was, if he was in an accident, couldn't receive an organ transplant because of the rules and stipulations that are going on about these things. And to me, that's just the most insane thing. He literally couldn't take a second jab because the first one almost killed him. Maybe that's blowing it out of proportion, but it took him a year for recovery. His head swelled up like a balloon. He talked us through the entire thing when I had him on a town hall with a number of my Substackers. So yeah, going from perfectly healthy and then into this situation where you can't take the second jab. And what I'd also learned is there's a number of other members of Legislative Assembly who are also vaccine injured. Their lives haven't been the same since they've taken the vaccine. And whether they're willing to admit it, that it was caused by the jabs, they know that it coincided with having the jabs. So they're still not having these conversations. But no, it's exactly like you said, is how many of these people dropped out just simply because whatever happened inside of their bodies was so severe that they weren't going to go back for another dose.
Well, and I think too, Sheldon, is there is a very robust medical literature, and there is decades and decades of precedence that I think Bhattacharya talked about this as well. Actually, it may have been somebody else, but I'm sure he has. Where like if you had a medical intervention of any sort that had even 0.1% of the types of adverse reactions that were occurring from multiple jabs that were being offered for COVID, you would immediately stop that study. That there is a precedent of that, and that is standard medical practice, and that didn't happen with any of these things, which was very frightening to see.
No, and that's it. And I mean, this is what we're looking at for the number of, and these are considered the more serious adverse events. So what I talked about before was the SAEs, the serious adverse events, the MAAEs, the medically attended adverse events, and the AESIs, adverse events of special interest. Now, each province actually went through and broke out what their AESIs are, and it was done by the federal government, by Health Canada as well. And I'm sure that there's a lot of the same conditions. I'm sure it's just a duplicate document with each province's title or with Health Canada at the top of it. But they're the more severe things, the more severe reactions. But when they break them out into AESIs, MAAEs, SAEs, you don't actually know what those are or how many individual cases of them there are. They just show them as AESIs, but they're the more severe ones. So out of the 21,000 people, 21,587, and there's actually an error in here because they call it out of 21,587 when this number that we had a look at up here said it's 21,583. So there's already a difference of 4 people. Did they screw up in this line or did they screw up in every line after that? I don't know, but it's only 4 people. So I'd never spent a whole lot of time talking about it because it's really 4 people, whatever, right? But when you take and add up all the serious adverse events that are on this, what did we come up with? There was 7,887 serious adverse events out of 21,587 people. But it's not out of 21,587 people because only 16,099 actually made it all the way through the trials, right? And if we wanted to break it down further, for the number of people that got participants who received a second dose was only 20,770. So either the 1699 or the 2770 are the numbers that we should actually be looking at. And does it shift it that much? Well, when you break it down, if it's out of 16,099, that looks at an AE rate, a severe adverse event rate of 49%. 49% of the people that finished this trial, potentially, if we knew what the rest of the numbers would be adjusted to, 49%, 1 in 2 people was getting a severe adverse reaction to the jab or had a severe adverse reaction that followed the jabs. Now you're talking 10% here is what you mentioned Jay's number might have been. And I'm sure it should be in some sort of threshold like that. Inside of the study, they actually break it down into a 5% variance. And what that 5% variance actually looks like is there are a certain amount of conditions that are going to happen inside of the natural population, and those are what we call the control group. The control group was 50%, and you can see that right here. It was only 10,793 people, whereas the Jabby group, there were 21,000, right? So when they're doing these studies, the value of the placebo is because there's a certain amount of conditions that are going to happen in whether it's healthy people or some of these people that are immune compromised in the placebo group. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to verify if they could keep that within a 5% threshold of what they were seeing in the vaccines. Now, the placebo group had a number of these severe adverse reactions as well. And you think, how does salt water cause this many issues? Well, this was a study that was taken, and you can see from day 1 up to 2 years. So they used 760 days. So these adverse events may have happened up to 760 days. So inside of the placebo group, this is what you have. You have about 2,000 out of 10,000. Here you've got, which would be about, what's that? 2,000 out of 10,000 is 1 out of 5. That's 20%. So 20% of the people had serious adverse events happen to them following the placebo, the saline water. Potentially 50% of the people inside of the AstraZeneca had them. And if not, even that if we assume that this 21,587 number is right, 8 out of 20 or 8,000 over 21,000, that's about 30%. So it's still a large number, 36.5% AE rate by just what they're giving. That's 1 in 3 people. 1 in 3 people had a severe adverse reaction. And when you go through the statistics, again, before there was vaccines, when you realized how small the risk was to healthy people, if you have a small risk to healthy people and you have a high risk, 30% chance, 36% chance that you could suffer from one of these AEs, of varying severity that included up to death. Somebody should have sat back and said, are we really doing the right thing here? Like, should we really be going on with this study? So, those are some of the things that I'd started to look at. And they don't really break down. And this is kind of an important thing too. They don't really break down because what some of the other studies did look at, and I believe it was the one from Canvas looked at the same thing, is how many people actually, when they break this down. Where did I have it here? Yeah, so they don't. There's going to be an overlap. There's going to be people that had a minor adverse reaction, and a minor adverse reaction can be injection site pain, which I don't see how 100% of people aren't reporting injection site pain. Somebody stabs a needle into your arm, you feel pain. Everybody does. 100% of people should have felt that, but not everybody did. Okay, whatever. But we don't know how many people had that minor that also had a severe adverse reaction. So maybe it was something like you got a headache and then you collapsed and had a heart attack. We don't know what these look like because they didn't publish the individual cases. We don't know how many people had 2 or more adverse reactions because we did see that inside of the Canadian studies that, there was, let's call it 100,000 injuries. Actually, I think it's closer to 50,000. So there's 50,000 adverse events, but it happened in 45,000 people. So that, people had more than one adverse reaction. But following each dose, what we'd realized from the Canvas study is what they basically said is that if you have a bad reaction to the jab, means that your immune system isn't that good, you're not going to have a really good time with COVID. Meaning you're really not going to have a good time if you get another jab, meaning you're really not going to have a good time if you have COVID again. But there was so little data that was put inside of here. We don't know if there was no AEs reported after the first dose, which I have here, and a minor in the second. We don't have if there was no AEs and a severe one. Maybe it was on the second jab, but one of those 62 people died. We don't know, right? And because we don't know, it's when even without knowing, just seeing the data the way that they presented it, we're going to leave some of this information here. We're going to take some of this information out. We're still going to call it out of the full test subjects, even though the full test subjects didn't get both vaccinations, even though they were supposed to. Because, I mean, how many people that took the placebos didn't get the second saltwater jab? They all got it, right?
I was going to ask you actually, Sheldon. Sorry to interrupt you in your train of thought there. What is your theory about the numbers of reactions that we do see in the placebo group? It seems high, like it seems quite high. I don't know. I don't know how to analyze these studies the same way you do, but it seems like that's a really high amount of reactions for a placebo.
Yeah. So what it is, and again, we're not working with 100% healthy people here. But the adverse events that followed were, and a lot of these were taken inside of the first, the first 48 days. So the first 48 days, or was it? Yeah, it was the first 28 days. Sorry. It was in the first 28 days is when they were measuring these things. So if you had an immediate reaction inside of those first, you get your jab, you wait 14 days or whatever, you get your second jab. Those are the ones where they were tracking these minor things. The more severe ones are things that could have been triggered by the vaccines, but may not have been. They're naturally occurring. If people sprouted an eyeball out of their head, like they talked about, it'll make you grow a third eye. That's how they try to discredit the conspiracy theorists. Oh yeah, you're going to grow a third eye with your jab, or you're going to get better Wi-Fi. If you would have grown a third eye, and that's never happened in the history of the planet, but it happened following the jabs, you would say that's definitely caused by the jabs. But what happens is these things cause genetic damage. They potentially cause other situations. The genetics, maybe not so much with the AstraZenecas, but more on the Pfizer Modernas, because they use the RNA technology. But these do still have the impact or possibility to impact your organs, your lungs, your kidneys, your liver, so they still have the ability to impact those organs, but those organs can also be damaged in other natural ways as well. Now, this was over 2 years, so a lot had happened throughout that 2 years. So just as an example, as we were going through the lockdown process, they locked down gyms, they locked down people's work. And when you went to the grocery stores, aside from toilet paper, what you noticed is people bought a lot of packaged shit, like macaronis and rices and pastas. All that stuff was cleared. In Edmonton, I was at the Superstore on 137th Ave. It's the one that's closest to my sister's. It's basically over by St. Albert there, right? So when we went in there, and they were talking about all this crap that was going on in the news, and we were just more focused on my mom's health at the time. And they're saying, they're selling out of toilet paper, and the stores are crazy right now, and people are, So we hadn't gone out shopping in a couple of days, but we went out to pick up a couple of groceries. We went in there, and sure enough, the toilet paper, the paper goods aisle was completely wiped. Like there wasn't a Kleenex box, not a roll of toilet paper. People were buying paper towels, because back, I don't know, whatever it was. But inside of that period, when you take something that, we call our basal metabolic rate, you guys sound like you know a little bit about health, right? Your basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy that your body uses, which means you have to match that with the amount of calories. If you're in a deficit, you lose weight. If you're in excess, you gain weight, right? So what happened there? And your immune system is not that much different. If you want to impact your immune system, eat more pro-inflammatory foods, or get less sleep, or be under high stress, or drink a lot of alcohol. And when I talk about this, I've actually drawn this example to, how people get sick when they come home from an overseas holiday, but they're not sick when they go there. So inside of an airport, you're exposed to the same amount of, not that anybody's counted them, but let's call it the same amount of exposure to coughs, colds, flus, different viruses when you're flying out to your destination. So then you get on the plane, you come home, but it's only when you come home that you actually get sick. Now, there's a certain gestation period where a virus takes a while before it's actually going to trigger a response in you. But that basal metabolic rate that we have for our normal day-to-day lives is our immune system. We basically have a basal immune rate is what I call it. So you can come in contact, and people that have children really know this. You send your kids off to school, and you catch every cough, or they bring home at least every cough, cold, and flu that every other kid has. You get a certain exposure to those things, and we don't see those throughout the summer. They're in respiratory virus season, so you kind of gain an immunity that as we get older, and if we're a little bit more health conscious, then we have that good, strong basal metabolic rate. So if we come in contact with several different coughs, colds, flus on a day-to-day life, because prior to 2020, if you were sick, you still had to go to work, get your ass to work. So you didn't catch every cough, cold, flu, right?
You look at the most vulnerable, let's say our elderly, and for them, like some of their walks, some of their trips outside, that was most of their exercise. So if they stop doing their walks, they stop going outside because they're discouraged from being even close to people. They're wearing a mask, they don't go as far. They're not getting any of their exercise that way. There's also the messaging, well, it's a tough time, just give yourself comfort food. It's okay to have a little bit of junk, or like there was no messaging telling you like, well, this is the time where you got to keep eating good food to fuel yourself. So you add all this up, we were not helping people become more robust or healthier to fight any of this off.
No, and that's exactly it. We did the absolute inverse of that. We shut down gyms. We left fast food and fast food joints and liquor stores open. So and I know this, like, even when it came to my wife. So my wife, when she goes to work, she's got a large flight of stairs that she has to go up before she gets to her office. And throughout COVID, she was basically working from home most of the time. But the first couple of weeks that she had to go back, she's like, I can't believe I could barely make that flight of stairs anymore. Well, you've lost, from that, like we talked about, that basal metabolic rate where, you burn so much energy with your day-to-day processes. When you stop doing that, then you lose muscle mass and you acquire fat. So getting back to my example here. So when you go on a trip, your immune system is in check. You've consumed the same basic foods. You keep up the same basic physical activities, whether that's, walking to the train and sitting there and riding to work and then walking into your office, or whether it's walking up that flight of stairs, or whether it's, full on going out to the gym. You maintain that regular course of action. Your immune system is in, it's in a state of balance. When you go on vacation, you go out and, you're eating foods that your body's not accustomed to eating. You're probably consuming way too much alcohol. You're not sleeping great because you're out to enjoy the 7 days that you have off, right? You're at an all-inclusive. You're not sleeping great. You're not getting the same physical activity. So what have you done to your immune system while you're on holidays? You've tanked it. So when you expose yourself to the same amount of coughs, colds, flus that you see inside of every airport, and you fly home, that's when you get sick. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's hard to hard to also note, like, all this is happening in the background, and that's also starting to feed into some of this data and the placebo effect as well, like what people are experiencing with just what is circulating at the time, because this is over a multi-year period. So there is all this happening during the lockdown. So this is not indicative of just healthy people leading a healthy life. This is people becoming less healthy over these 2 years.
Yeah, none of these people from this study, do we know, were they in a long-term care facility? Now, if it's even seniors assisted living, where they'll have nurses, but people are free to come and go as they please. And I've had relatives inside of these places as well, but they restricted their movements. They couldn't leave the building, basically. So these people were locked down for 2 years and doing the same things, maybe not getting the right amount of vitamins and nutrients through a quality based diet, they're definitely not getting the same amount of exercise. So when we see the placebo group with a high number of AEs, a portion of that may be attributed to the fact that we just got people a lot less healthy throughout the course of the pandemic or throughout the course of the 2 years that this was being conducted. That's basically what I'm saying. It's the vacation that I told you about extended over a 2-week period. And that's basically what you're looking at there.
I do have a question. Like, looking at these adverse events seem much, much higher than any of the Canadian or even Alberta data for adverse events. And what's got is that it seems like, well, maybe our reporting is not, or should be, let it be, maybe doctors are not following up and actually inputting, because studies, one thing, they're bound by a little bit different kind of, they have different incentives to actually follow communications potentially better. But think about how many Canadians don't actually have a family doctor, how many of them found it difficult to even get an appointment in or discuss some of these things. And if people are having these jabs administered at a random pharmacy, they're kind of losing these one-on-one personal relations and that contact of, well, like, it seems like we really don't have this system set up to actually, well, if this is a study and the study's muddy for the information, given however well structured it is, that's already muddy. It seems like, of course, our adverse events reporting is going to be even worse in Canada. It's so whatever number we have, it's going to be much, much lower than what it actually should be.
And there's a few different things that you can kind of throw into the same mix, James. So one of the things is people stop going to the doctor throughout the scamdemic. Doctor's offices closed, and you got a telephone conversation. Some, if you were lucky, you got a video conversation. A doctor's not going to be able to break down a condition. They're not going to be able to tell if you've got myocarditis over the phone, right? They're just not. So you call your doctor and you say, you know what, I'm feeling a little light, little weak-headed, or little lightheaded. And what's he going to say? Well, take 2 aspirins and call me in the morning, right? Because he's getting paid $35 or $85 a call. So he'll have you phoning back every 3 days to check on this. But would they necessarily attribute these things to the vaccination? Because unless somebody specifically said, listen, I got the vaccine this morning and I've been nauseous since, I've got diarrhea, I've got a headache, and my chest is killing me, would the doctor be able to do anything with that? Now, there's also a threshold that we use. So inside of the province of Alberta, these things had to be reported within 4 days of them being found. So you go to your doctor, he runs some tests. The tests are gone for 2 months. You finally get your call back in because the healthcare system is terrible here. They realize that you've got myocarditis. It's outside of that window for reporting, right? The last thing that kind of comes into play, and we talked a little bit about this before we kind of got on the call, is that the way that they looked at what was causing these injuries. So there's 2 things. So if when you look at the elderly people that suffered the most from COVID, they suffered the least amount of vaccine injuries, according to the statistics provided by all provinces and by Health Canada. And the reason that is because if they had mild heart damage already, and that condition was worsened by the jab, it was not attributed to the jab. It was still considered a pre-existing condition. The second thing that kind of comes into play there is if you were on a prescription medication that had the potential to cause the same adverse reactions as what we'd seen from the jabs, it was attributed to your existing medications instead of being attributed to the jabs.
Even if you had no history of developing those conditions in your history of taking that medication.
And that's absolutely correct.
Think about how long a list, like, you can take a single medication can have 20 things listed as potential side effects, and then think about how many elderly are on 5 or 10 different prescriptions. So that covers like how much overlap is in kind of these what would have been an adverse event, and how
Off
much
the
is
top
just
of my
covered in
head,
this soup of medication.
off the top of my head, it's 1 in 3 people over the age of 80 years old is on 10 or more medications inside of Canada from the 2021 statistics. I broke that down for my book. I did the research, found what it was, and I was actually shocked by this. Yeah. And what these things are is, you get one pill for one condition, and maybe you have 3 conditions, so you get 3 pills for that. The combinations of these pills are on their own, have weakened your immune system, have caused some shifting inside of your body. So you don't feel well. So you go back to your doctor and he adds a 4th one to counterbalance some of the symptoms, maybe a 5th one, right?
Yeah.
So each one of these things, and it's like you said, has a list of adverse reactions all on their own. So we don't know if that's accurate. Now, when you harm your immune system by, again, just the simple stab commands an immune reaction. What is that triggering inside of your body if you've got a pre-existing condition and are already other meds? Like there's a whole lot of stuff that can go on, and especially inside of a thing that your body will not recognize, instead of something that's not been tested, in mass populations during a fucking pandemic.
Yeah. I saw a little bit of this with my dad when he was alive. With he had type 2 diabetes, and the cocktail that guy was on was absolutely absurd. And every new specialist that you'd go to, if your parents have ever had any sort of chronic conditions, that these specialists, like, no matter how specialized they are and how respected in their field they are, honestly, it feels like they just do not have the time for anything. They don't look at what you're taking. They don't look at, any potential interactions. Just here, throw another script on it, see what happens, come back and see me in 6 months if you can get an appointment then. And, so it falls on the family or yourself. Just essentially you're a guinea pig for yourself, just figuring out like, okay, well, I started taking this med at this time and now I'm having these interactions, and now, this medication isn't working as well. So I'm having this new effect. Like, it's, the medical system in Canada right now is an absolute disgrace, and I could that's a whole other podcast, guys.
No, it completely is, and I say that to everybody. If we wanted to talk about actual health and nutrition, I mean that's like an 18-hour marathon, because we literally could go through that much. The same thing happens on a consumption scale. So you've eaten the same foods your whole life, you start getting sick. Did you develop an allergy to it? Did you develop an intolerance to it? People consume themselves into type 2 diabetes. They're eating too much junk, not enough good stuff, and they're not resting enough. Their calorie count, or they're greatly in excess of their basal metabolic rate, or their active metabolic rate. So there's only so much room inside of the fat cells for extra energy to be packed into. And when we looked at the people that were the highest risk, I think it was 9 out of 10 top conditions were consumption-related diseases, right? So if you had a bad liver comes from NALFD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or it comes from being an alcoholic. So if that's on there, that's a consumption-related disease. How do you cure a consumption-related disease? You change your consumption habits, right? Instead, what would they do is they give us a prescription for it. Now, in the prescriptions that a lot of elderly people get, to prevent them from having strokes and heart conditions and blood clots, and this is the last main thing that I'm talking about as to why we may not have seen such high numbers of reported adverse events in elderly people inside of Canada, is that they're already taking blood thinners. So if you take a jab that can cause blood clots, heart damage, and strokes, and you're already taking something to mitigate those circumstances, you're already addressing the symptoms before this has a chance to react. So when you look at the balance of, or the age associated adverse events inside of each one of the provinces or from Health Canada, the reason that you see, those, I think it's like 50 to 60 years old is where they actually spike the highest, is because those people are genuinely still pretty healthy. They're not on as many prescriptions, and they haven't been diagnosed with as many conditions inside of their body. So if there was something that happened, those were the ones that were reported. As the scale moved closer to the 80 plus, you have more medications, you have more pre-existing health conditions, and you have more things that are mitigating the circumstances for those things. So they were discounted.
Yeah, there's also the aspect of if you, I'm sure, point to their own like parents or grandparents of you reach a certain age, and pretty much every month or two thing new. So a change in your health is not like obviously it's something to be concerned about, but it's not out of the ordinary for something to and I think that gets brushed under this umbrella of, well, you're just old, you're just developing these things, or well, you have these conditions, and what's one more thing on the top. So if they took a jab and something changed, I think you kind of just soak it up in this whole mess of just trying to deal with health at a certain age, where if somebody's 50 and they don't have anything chronic and they take a jab and they notice something different, that's going to be a bigger change than somebody who's already in a certain number of kind of chronic conditions. There's also the aspect of, I think, since some of the elderly, they're at the state where they're fighting with conditions, how many of them have just passed away from natural causes? And I put that in quotations. And you don't report these adverse events, and you don't make up towards the causality of any of the shots that they took. But like any natural causes, deaths also hide any adverse events because they're at an age where these things happen anyways, and there's the plausibility of nature taking its course.
Well, and that's exactly it too. But even if it wasn't causal, there are a number of elderly, and there was some studies done on an underreporting factor. And basically, as the older you get, the more you are willing to put up with minor symptoms that are caused by a new medication, and you don't always make that connection. So, again, a senior, like we all should, they go in, they get an injection in their arm. Of course, they have localized pain around the injection site because we all do. They don't have dead nerves inside of their entire arms, right? But they get 100 other needles, every 6 months, or, they get a regular shot of insulin, or they get a regular whatever. So because, and again, these are on the minor side of things, the minor adverse reactions. But I think it was inside of the first 100 deaths inside of the United States, following vaccinations, and I think it was within 24 hours, a guy literally shit himself to death after having the vaccination. I believe it was Pfizer, and I'd have to go back. I haven't looked at this in like 3 years. But yeah, the guy got the shot and later that same night shit himself to death.
What was the diagnosis? Do you know?
I don't know. When I first started pulling the early reports from VAERS, I'd only look at what was going on and what happened to them. How serious was the adverse event, and did they die? And like I said, it was inside of the first 100 deaths. You'll find that one of them is, chronic diarrhea. I can't even remember the terms they use.
Yeah.
I don't think I still have the sheet even open. It's, again, 3 years old.
Wow. What a shitty way to go.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
You want to go back? Where did you want me to go back to? Or are you saying move on?
Or I was just, I was going to say, even with these number of, even with the data out right now, what I've noticed is you have loud headlines and quiet retractions, and with all this AstraZeneca data coming out now, you think more people would kind of ask questions about why. Well, why do they say it was safe and effective? Why were we mandated? Why, like, do they still have the same trust in public health, even what we're kind of looking, what's right in front of us right now? And it feels like with the quiet retractions, people are slow to change on this. I have friends and family members who are still, you tell them, you point out, you tell them some new things, and they're not, I don't know, they're not ready to make any connections. They're not ready to see things from any other perspective rather than it was necessary, or it saved a few people, or it was safe and effective. They kind of repeat these mantras.
Yeah, and I think a lot more people are waking up. They're starting to see what's going on with their families, and like we just had a death in the family last month, and it was an aneurysm. So my cousin's brain basically exploded. He got up in the morning. He had a headache the day before. Got up in the morning. Did his morning routine. Walked the dog. He was supposed to be heading to Calgary. He lives out by Pigeon Lake there. Had an aneurysm, and his wife found him on the floor gurgling blood. He was dead before the paramedics got there, basically. His wife, after getting 3 jabs, and he'd only had 1 jab. His wife, after getting 3, she got basically triple cancer. She's basically been gutted as a person. And, when my cousin passed away, we all went to Red Deer, just pay respects to, show our condolences, pay respects, meet up with the family, that sort of thing. So, of course, there's not a lot of chatter that was going on specifically about the vaccines and the damages that they could cause. And from what I'd known at that time, I didn't know he was vaccinated. One of the other cousins that showed up, he's had a couple of bouts of cancer. It looks terrible. And while I expect him to probably make it through Christmas, I have one more cousin that I don't. And again, he got the jabs. He's doing everything to mitigate it. But as all of his family from the States has flown out to see him, because nobody's sure how long he's got left on this planet. So my sister, and she bought into on the hook, line, and sinker. And this is before, I was doing Substack and really breaking this stuff out. Does some work at a long-term care, a seniors community. So she works around a lot of old people. And she wasn't really particularly scared of COVID. But she bought in on the it will help keep other people healthy thing. So she got a couple of jabs, and then she suffered from brain fog, and it went on for months. And she goes, I'm losing my mind. What can I do for this? So I'd made a couple of recommendations. After, a few months, she said, like, how long do I have to keep taking this stuff? Like, I'm perfectly 100% better. And I said, well, then you should be fine. We've basically counterbalanced whatever deficiency that this has created inside of your body. And you're probably fine now. If it changes, go back to doing the same thing. So, flash forward to this last weekend. My cousin's wife was in Edmonton visiting with my sister. And that's when she found out that both her and her husband were jabbed. And so we've got the cancer, and now we've got the death. And she says to me, she goes, is this going to happen to me? I don't know.
At least
I'm just starting to get into
the question. So, which is good.
What's that?
Well, if somebody's asking these questions, and that's at least a step in the right direction of starting to connect some dots, starting to maybe these things seem a little unusual. Like, even I can point to between friends of me, 3 or 4 cancers. I have a friend in their 30s who had breast cancer. Like, I know a few 30s breast cancer, and that's quite young for breast cancer as well, and just happened in the last year. So I think at some point it's going to be more visible. So I guess those questions being asked, I think that's a good sign.
It is a good sign, because there are a lot of things that people can do to help themselves and encourage themselves to be healthy. Do I really need to have Skip the Dishes or McDonald's or French fries with everything that I have. Maybe I can move away from consuming toast with my morning eggs. There are a lot of things that people can do to keep themselves healthy and maintain their immune systems and help mitigate these circumstances without additional drugs that are going to cause additional problems. So no, it's important that we have the questions. It's important that people are waking up to this. And again, I'm going to go back to the injection of truth because I'd had an opportunity to talk to Dr. David Speaker and have him break me out on the LNPs, liquid nanoparticles, the SV40 targeting, the possible genetic damages that could be caused. And, that was just a whole wide world of exposure that I'd never really gotten into. I understand that people were suffering from adverse events. I had seen some of the early talks on the genetic modification. People send me stuff all the time, but when I was working full time, I was just way too busy to go through and podcast or be on my Substack or be on a social media platform and having conversations to really dive into everything. And I'd gotten into a couple of platforms, like Telegram was one. And I had Telegram open. I had a couple of doctors that invited me into their Telegram groups, and then I'd keep getting alerts, and it was distracting for me. It was alerts on my phone, and it was alerts on my computer. So I took it off my computer so it wouldn't bother me there. And then it was alerts on my phone. So I eventually took it off of there. And then I had a friend say, "Hey, you got to hop on this Telegram channel to see what you'd missed." And this was a matter of a few months. And there was something like 27,000 missed messages. I was like, fuck you. I am not going through all of this to find one nugget of information that you'd sent off a couple of weeks. I'm not doing it. Send it to me directly. Oh, I don't know where it is. Yeah. Okay. If it was important, find it, send it to me if you do. Cause I'm not, I'm just, even my own personal inbox right now, I've got some, in my primary, I've got some 47,000 unread emails, and I delete in swaths of emails. So if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to receive emails because I'm already at like max usage on my my Gmail. But there's so much information that goes out that I didn't catch on to all of it. But when I finally listened to Dr. Speaker talk about it, I was floored. So this injection of truth, I think it's like a really big thing that's happening. And I think it's one of those things that will hopefully start to wake some more people up and then start to have some more conversations about this.
Can hope so.
Yep. Bit by it,
yeah,
it all adds up. So.
Yeah. So moving back to the study here. So when we looked at it, there was the phase 3 was randomized, and this is what we talked about, the health of the participants who were in healthy or had medically stable chronic diseases. So they were healthy or they weren't healthy. We talked about the potential of, what happened throughout COVID with diet and exercise that could have potentially, triggered some of those things in addition to the jabs. But when we looked at it, and even on the death side of things, deaths really didn't seem that high on either one of these things. But it was 4.33% from people getting saline, so salt water. Apparently, by percentage wise, protected more people from mortality than the jabs did. And to me that doesn't make sense, because that would indicate that there's a problem right there. Wait, so we can give people salt water instead of giving them vaccines, and they stood a better chance of survival? And the answer was yes, but it's only moderate. But it's still a yes.
If it saves one life,
through the rest,
and
yeah, if it saves one life, that's right.
We need a saline vaccine passport.
Yeah, sign me down. Now, here's one of the things that really bothered me about this, and I broke it out in a previous Substack, but I wanted to break it out again just because we're doing this, and it's one of the most troubling things about this is the total women inside of the AstraZeneca trials were 9,603, and I don't know how many of those dropped out before the end of the trial, because remember, we went from that 21,587 people down to 16,099. I don't know how many men dropped out. I don't know how many women dropped out. But the reason that this is important, and same with this, median age 50.2 years old, and that was in both sides of the study. So they, it wasn't so randomized as you thought, because if they had the exact same median age inside of the groups, there had to be a little bit of sorting going on there, right? So the average age of these people was 50 years old. There was only 9,000 women. But when they broke out the data on spontaneous abortions, and this is the other thing that pisses me off too, is for part of the study, for the initial part of the study, they kept all the AstraZeneca on the one side and the placebo on the other. And then when they got to the more severe adverse reactions, and inside of their 117-page report, they reversed them. So over here is now where we're seeing these the AstraZeneca group. Now, the one thing you notice is that, we went from 0.03% or 3 out of 10,793 people that were exposed had abortions, whereas it was 0.7%. So it increased your chances of spontaneous abortion, is what it looks like, by 100%. It more than doubled it, in fact, right? The problem with these metrics in what they're using it is 21,587 people, first off, didn't participate. There was only 20,000, whatever, that got the second jab. From that, only 9,603 of them were women. 25,000 or 21,587 people couldn't spontaneously abort, because only 9,603 of them conceivably could have conceived. And inside of that, the median age was 50.2 years old. There's not a lot of 50-year-olds having babies. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Even less 50-year-old men.
Even less, way less on the 50-year-old men's side of things.
We got to be careful with that, Sheldon.
But I find it upsetting that instead of stating how many women actually got pregnant in, because I think that would be really important.
They would have had that info,
how many
wouldn't
people,
they?
Yeah. How many people got pregnant on the
Is
placebo
that part of their
side? How many
collection?
people
Do you think? Yeah,
it's got to be.
I don't know. And I don't know why people were getting pregnant throughout this thing anyways. Like, at what point did they decide that the vaccinations were safe to be tested on pregnant people without actual testing?
Yeah. You're not supposed to eat. You're not supposed to eat deli meat when you're pregnant, but they're taking experimental vaccines.
Yeah. Don't go into a hot tub. Don't eat cheese.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of these things. So yeah, I find that really upsetting. But this is where I also say, like, the thing about it is they, in those, what was it, 66 or 62 deaths, and even the 33 inside of the placebo, as because these were aborted fetuses, as they weren't considered into the death counts. They weren't a part of that. And I find that troubling. Now, I know there's a lot of conversations on abortion and, how long before we call it a baby, that kind of thing. But spontaneous abortion, and when it comes to a clinical trial where we're trying to figure out if this is going to harm women that are having babies that are under the age of 50, then there should be a lot more information that kind of comes around this, instead of this is a bullshit summary. The 21,587 is offensive, because
that
not
is not
all
an
21,000. Yeah, not all 21,587 people got the jabs, 2 jabs anyways. And yeah, not all the people that were inside of the women's group could have had babies.
Yeah, reading through this, I look at this, and that 21,587 shows up when it's convenient to show up as the largest number to divide by. And this is just
diluting the statistics.
Yeah. Well, it's so obvious. I mean, like, no legitimate study would be presented like that, where it's 90% of it is column A versus column B, and then you invert it when the statistics start to look inconvenient, right?
That's it. In pneumonia, I found this again. Your chances of getting a pneumonia with AstraZeneca had more than doubled as well. So there was actually quite a large number of people that got pneumonia in the AstraZeneca group versus the saline group, right? So we're not saying that saline causes pneumonia. We're saying that these people got pneumonia throughout this 2-year period because they didn't have the AstraZeneca jab, whereas more people were impacted. Their immune systems were more impacted that led to pneumonia. Now, there's over 30 types of pneumonia that you can actually get, right? So, and there's one of those that's called COVID pneumonia. But surprisingly, if you got the saline, it was, 100% safer, over 100% safer than it was to have the AstraZeneca jab, except, wink, wink, except if it was COVID-19 related pneumonia, because then the placebo group didn't do as well. And the numbers are close, but again, keeping in mind that there's 10,000 or 10,793 in the placebo, 21,587 in the AstraZeneca group. So, we have to go on the percentages. So 0.19% here, 0.13. Your COVID pneumonia looked safer in the AstraZeneca. The thing about it is this whole thing was to stop COVID, right? Like that's the reason that they came up with the jabs. That's the reason that they were doing these studies. Does it stop COVID? Well, if people still got COVID after it and people still died of COVID pneumonia, then the answer is no. What the fuck is the rest of the study for? Right? It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So they talk about reducing in certain severities and mortalities. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Sheldon. Do you know the second and third rows of these statistics? Do you know how they define what is causally related or not? Did they say that anywhere? How they define what is causally related to the treatment or otherwise?
No, they don't. They don't describe it. But if you look at all of the breakdown of these things, they said that there's nothing causally related to the jab. So it always shows up as a 0 over all, right?
Yeah, another convenient statistical manipulation, hey?
And deaths causally related, so occurrences and deaths causally related. It always shows up as, no, the jabs didn't cause this.
Yeah,
sure the statistics don't look that good.
Those zeros seem very certain.
Yeah,
like that's a very convenient and certain kind of proclamation that there is no link. It's like when things come up and there's a coincidence, like, well, we don't know what caused it, but we was not the jabs. So they say, kind of speak out of both sides of the mouth for a lot of these things.
Exactly. And on some of these things, I mean, when you only see 5 cases, five urinary tract infections, pyelonephritis, whatever, 5 urinary tract infections inside of 21,000 people. Like, to me, that doesn't seem like a large number, but there was only 5 inside of that group. There was absolutely 0 inside of the saline group. So, salt water helps you pee. Maybe that was part of it, right? Same thing with abscess limb.
Rehydrated those participants.
Yeah. Abscess limb, it's like you got pus coming out of your skin and stuff. It's not like, you're losing appendages like that one MP out of the UK. Did you see that guy? He had to go through getting his hands and his feet cut off. Yeah. Jesus. Lost hands and feet. They had to cut his appendages right off. So these, I don't think that any things were that severe, but they only happened inside of the AstraZeneca group, right? Diverticulitis, again, something else that only happened in this group. So whether it was diverticulitis intestinal perforated, that only happened in the AstraZeneca group, and there was a large spike in the number of occurrences following the vaccinations, right? Acute myocardial infarction. This looks terrible to me. Again, this is more than double your chance of myocardial infarctions, and on appendicitis. People's appendixes were taken a blunt. Now, this doesn't seem as bad. 29 people out of 21,000, and it's almost in line with appendicitis in the saline group. So what I did is I actually went and had a look at the, I thought, well, how many people actually get appendicitis? So from Johns Hopkins, and if somebody downloads the PDF and they click on the hyperlink, it'll actually take you to where it breaks this down, is 1 in 1,000 people will have appendicitis. So if you look at 11 people out of over about 11,000 people, that's 1 in 1,000. If you look at 29,000 or 29 people out of 21,000, you basically have to add an extra 750 people to the AstraZeneca side in order for those numbers to actually make sense. So there was a spike in
You're
occurrence.
above baseline.
You're above baseline. Coronary artery disease. And again,
That's a big one.
That's a big one. So 25 people got CAD, which was 0.12% and only 0.05%. So again, I think the 0.05 is probably pretty close to baseline, keeping in mind that not all of our subjects were altogether that healthy to begin with. CAD, again, a consumption-related disease, right? So it seems high. To me, it just seems really high.
Also,
and
there's zeros or like I'm noticing we've gone through more of these cases. They're not willing to admit like they're all zeros of how many are currently related. They're not willing to even admit a single causally related relationship.
Yeah.
In any of these.
That's exactly what they're saying. Sure, these people got it, but it 100% wasn't caused by the thing that's causing all the other things, right?
So we're seeing a pattern continually above baseline in the group that was not the placebo. Placebo was doing better for all these, but they know for certain there's no causal link to the Astra at all.
Yeah.
So that blows my mind.
And again, there was people's health impacted by diet and exercise through this, but it would have been equally impacted on both the placebo and the AstraZeneca side. So how much more can be attributed? Well, I don't think that it can rationalize more than double in what we were seeing there.
I wonder, actually, this just kind of came to my mind. I wonder if some of the statistics can be attributed to the fact that it'd be so hard to verify this, but I wonder if the people who were I guess you wouldn't know. I guess I was thinking maybe the people who were vaccinated engaged in, riskier behavior because they thought they had a higher level of protection and thus that might explain some of the increase. But of course, this is a placebo trial, so they wouldn't know if they actually got the vaccine unless they were told, but you can't verify that either.
Well, and there was some unmasking that was done at the end of the trial. So there's probably a lot of these people that went out and got another jab on top of it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Keeping in mind that the study only goes through dose 1 and dose 2. And I talk a little bit about that when I go into the comparative analysis with Canada. So I'm not going to go over that. But again, what I wanted to point out, and after I come through, the things that seemed a little bit more alarming to me is that the number of people that completed dose 2 was only 20,770, not 21,587. The number of people that actually completed the trial was 16,099. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd fire every one of these motherfuckers. I would, because this is terrible. It's sloppy work. Track. How hard is it to track? I'm sure that they're all using a database, something that has a spreadsheet. It's pretty easy to sort that shit out. You've got patient numbers, some sort of identifiers on these people that they could have whittled it down into the actual full study of being only 16,099 people, which is
that might be
what they should have done.
It might be generous of you as well to believe that the people who actually published this report had any interest whatsoever in actually giving us accurate data. This could be exactly what somebody could have got a promotion for this.
No, and I bet they probably did. Now, from that, what I did is because we'd asked the question, why weren't we seeing the same amount of adverse events inside of Canada? And in Canada, there was 2.8 million doses of AstraZeneca that was actually given. And the total AEs that were reported for AstraZeneca were 4,718. And that's both serious and non-serious. So we could actually look at the table, but this is up to 4 doses, and there were minor injuries here. But there was only 4,718 adverse events on 2.8 million doses. We looked at that number and it was like, what, 36% to 50% inside of the phase 3 clinical trial. How does the phase 3 clinical trial come up with somewhere between 36 and 50%, whereas Canada comes up with so much less? Now, the total adverse events inside of Canada are still penciled in as 54,843, which to me is still a really high number. But they spread it out through the number of doses that were given. So there's over 100 million doses of vaccine given inside of Canada. And they say 54,000 is just a small fraction. So, and everybody says, well, yeah, look at how many billions of people, around the world have gotten the vaccinations. And to that, and I'm just going to pull up a calculator here just so it makes it easier because I don't remember the metrics of this. So let's say I'm a pack-a-day smoker. Package of cigarettes has 25 cigarettes for 25 years times 365 days. So off of that, I'm a pack-a-day smoker. I smoked a package of cigarettes every day of my life for 25 years. I would have smoked 228,125 cigarettes. I don't have cancer. Does that mean that cigarettes are safe?
According to AstraZeneca,
and then you
maybe.
say, what's the risk of a single cigarette then? Like if you're dividing by...
But that's exactly what they did with the jabs. They said 100 million jabs were given, 109 or 105 million jabs were given. Well, how many people are in Canada?
Yeah, we're at 40.
There's only 40 million people in Canada.
Yeah, it's just over 40 now. Yeah,
and we were just at like what 38.5 or something when the vaccine started.
Yeah. So that's not accounting for
what the point that you're driving at here. Sorry, James, go ahead.
No, that was go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that reminded me of I think, Sheldon, the point you're going for here is Brett Weinstein talked about this of like I can't remember the words he used, but it was like the difference between like risk and danger or something like that. I don't know how he phrased it, but he said basically like what you said. If I go and have 12 beers at the bar and then I drive home and I don't get into an accident, that doesn't mean that activity was safe. It just means that I didn't actually experience the consequences of what was very high likelihood of happening. So, when you're talking about these sort of things, you have to think about in the context of, anecdotally, it doesn't really mean much. You need to zoom out to population level statistics like what we're trying to do here.
No, and that's exactly correct. And I do it on cigarettes because smokers will have consumption is consumption. You smoke a cigarette, it's still considered consumption. The additional taxes that they put on cigarettes and, all the additional rules that have come out. And I mean, most smokers don't care that they can't smoke in a mall or a grocery store anymore. Most smokers don't care that you can't smoke a cigarette in the hospital or in a McDonald's. But adult type establishments, that should be left up to adult type people. And I don't know if you guys remember when they first started banning cigarettes inside of restaurants and bars and stuff. They started it on patios, so you couldn't smoke on a patio before you couldn't smoke in a bar. So I literally remember going to a wedding rehearsal. So after the wedding rehearsal, we all went out to the keg. Gorgeous day out, like it was in the summer. So it was this gorgeous day. We just wanted to sit outside, smoke a couple darts, have a couple of beers out on the patio. They said, no, you can't smoke out here. And we were like literally the only people out there. They said, you have to go inside and downstairs and sit in the bar and smoke your cigarettes there because somehow sitting inside of an enclosed again, the people that are doing these things, there's no logic that really runs around that.
The person who imagined that course of action is probably the same one who put the rows of tape down in the grocery store that were 6 inches or were 6 feet vertically separated, but only 4 or 5
feet.
inches horizontally separated.
Exactly. Yeah. So the virus only travels back and forth, not left and right, north to south, east to west. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, when we go back and have a look at these things, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say with this, so we're already dealing with the situation of potential underreporting, and then we're dealing with using a larger denominator to try to further dilute the percentage, to try to get numbers that look. If the conclusion is it's safe and effective, it feels like this is all being done to help enforce the conclusion first.
Exactly. It's set up. The metrics that they set up were to make this look favorable. Now, if you look at the total reports from Canada, you see 3,936, and this is off of dose 1. Off of dose 2, 336. So it's just less than 10% that had a reaction to the second jab of the AstraZeneca versus the first one. And I wanted to break this out for a couple of different reasons. Because when you looked at the clinical data for the AstraZeneca, off of dose 1, there was 5,736 people that were injured. Off of the second one, sorry, these are adverse events. There was 5,074. So, you take the overlap, the Venn diagram of minor AEs, the headaches or vomiting or nausea or, the injection pain. When you combine these things, they basically turned out to be I believe it's 8,771 people here, because everybody can see that 5,700 and 5,000 is not going to equal 8,000, right? So I'm guessing that this is more the number of people versus the actual number of injuries. And that's just how I made it make sense. Yeah. I could be wrong. It could be because they fucked this thing up so entirely to begin with.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody looked at that and said, I'm a scientist, not a mathematician.
It could be that
they don't always clarify.
It's conceivable. Sorry, James. It's conceivable that there are people who didn't have a reaction at the first dose and did have one at the second dose, and then they're messing with the numbers that way, rather than it being cumulative.
And yeah, that's when I talked about those 4 cases. Did they have a minor and then go to severe? Did they have a minor and then go to another minor? Did they have a no reaction and go to severe? No reaction, go to a non-severe. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this could be explained and should have been explained, but it's not in here. But anyways, when you look at this, it's 5,700 and then 5,000. So those numbers are pretty close. Whereas, again, if we go back to Canada, we had 3,900 and it dropped down to 336. Okay. Now, the reason for that is inside of Canada, and I think I have this coming up here, or maybe I'll get to that part. I explain it here, but I also show the screenshot. So when they were starting to look at the failure rate of AstraZeneca and the injury rates that were associated with it, there were some provinces already starting to close these things down. And I remember this because my son got his first jab as AstraZeneca, and he had to keep work. And, he was inside of the city. He was working for one of the train yards here, but he was traveling out to Field, BC. So inside of Alberta, we weren't under the same crackdown that Queen Bonnie put BC under. But they'd eventually gotten to a point where you couldn't go into a hotel or whatever there if you were unvaccinated. So in order for him to maintain his job, he had to get the jab. So he got his first one as AstraZeneca because it was just convenient, close. And then, Alberta, or they made the recommendation is nobody under 55 should be getting these anymore. So he had to go back to Walmart. And I mean, of all the places that I would go for a jab, and I'm sure that there's really nothing wrong. There's just a stigma that's attached to it. I don't even buy my groceries at Walmart. If I was going for a healthcare treatment, it wouldn't be going to Walmart. Now, the Waltons will probably sue me for that. And take everything I have. It's not going to amount to much for you, clowns. But what he had to do is, because they'd already made this ruling, is he had to go back and basically beg to get his second AstraZeneca so that he didn't have to get 2 other jabs that would delay him in being able to keep his job, to go into BC, because that's how stupid things were. But what happened here is, after, they expressed that there was 2.3 million people that had gotten their first AstraZeneca vaccine. But if you remember that number that we'd finished off with before, is there was only 2.8 million AstraZeneca jabs given. So there's only 500,000 people on the top side of this thing that conceivably could have gotten a second jab. But we'd also seen from the previous statistics that some of these people had dose 3 and dose 4. I get to this, so I'll just kind of go in order, so people following along with the home game don't get too lost in me flipping pages, right? Yeah, so where did I go from here? Yeah, so AEs in Canada. So if I extrapolated the data used from the clinical trial and applied it to the number of vaccinations that were given, the AE in Canada should actually be 787,349. Severe AEs caused by the AstraZeneca jabs should have been 534,572. But the total number of adverse events that were reported in Canada, where did I have that? That was, what page was that on? Was only 54,000. So you see, we do have a massive, massive underreporting factor, right? Well, I think it was right here. Yeah, right here. So 54,000 was the total, but that wasn't all from AstraZeneca. That's the total from Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and whatever else that they were trying. Only 54,000. Whereas if we took clinical data, applied it to the same amount of jabs that Canada had, extrapolated from there, we would have adverse events and serious adverse events measuring in the hundreds of thousands. How big is that underreporting factor?
That's a huge.
It's by factor.
Underreporting. The other two, we had messaging of, well, just take whatever is available and it's okay if you mix. Well, how does the mixing affect our reporting and this for a particular shot? In this case, like if it's under a certain it's that certain type. Now, as soon as you mix, now you have a distorted signal as well. And this all adds up to just muddying the data and making it harder to pinpoint the cause and effect for a single type or a single manufacturer. So
completely muddied waters. Yeah.
Which is fantastic if that's what you want to end up with. If you want to end up with numbers like this that are just, it's a complete dog's breakfast of like, how do you even make heads or tails of any of these statistics? Because there's for every number thrown at you, there's like 5 variables that also are thrown into the mix, and you can't really pin down, like, it's such a slippery thing that's if the goal is what you're going for is, hey, let's have a certain bank of numbers that we can draw from and publish whatever conclusion is expeditious to us, then that's exactly what they got.
And I'd say that's a lot of what you're going on, because the stats inside of everywhere was doctored by giving injections to people that stood 0 chance of mortality, zero chance of hospitalization or ICU admission, just like basically everybody under the age of 18. The numbers were so low. There's more kids that were run over in their driveways or in their neighborhoods that suffered more severe reactions than from COVID. So yeah. there was never any benefit to it.
So in Australia, there was one point in Australia where due to a freak bouncy castle accident, bouncy castle killed more children than the jabs did. I think that changed over time, but I think mid 2021, I remember when that was a true reality, that kids were more likely to be harmed, or no, they were more harmed from bouncy castles than they were from COVID.
Yeah, and I think in my age group at one point when I'd looked at it in 2020, I was more likely to be killed by a vending machine crushing me than I was to COVID. And I can obviously avoid
and vending machines,
machines, but the probability is still there. I mean, the probability is low, but it's never zero, right? The meme. Now, when we look at from what I just kind of said there, there should be somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 adverse events, for serious and non-serious. And we look at what was actually reported for AstraZeneca. Out of the total 59,000 adverse events that were reported, AstraZeneca came up awfully short of what we see now for both Moderna and Pfizer. So what we're looking at is the potential of millions of people that have been injured by the jabs that Canada just doesn't want to talk about. In fact, we know it. We've known it for a long time. And we've talked about some of those reasons why, right? So it's really troubling. And again, the clinical trial had set out with one main goal, which was the prevention of COVID-19. And the top of the study says this: phase 3 randomized for the prevention of COVID-19. And then when you get to the bottom of the study, and you look at it, what it actually shows is that, one, people still did get COVID, but two, more people got COVID in the AstraZeneca group than got it in the placebo group. So again, it looks like salt water, if that's what they used, and I still question that. Salt water had a larger protective factor than what AstraZeneca's vaccine did for the protection of COVID. And again, I think at this point, we need you to make something that's going to stop people from getting COVID. Okay, here's our vaccine. Does it stop people from getting COVID? No. Then go back to your little lab and find something that does.
Yeah, but we really wanted it to. So
yeah. And that's it. So what I did is from here is I just kind of went through exactly what was happening, and I'd mentioned this, we're not giving it in people under the age of 55. But what you need to kind of see in this thing is that we didn't study it for the full 2 years. We studied adverse events, and it's called onset latency. So if it happened outside of the onset latency, it couldn't possibly be considered from the vaccines. So your chest is moderately sore one day, more sore. You go to your doctor. He says, take a couple of aspirins or, whatever. Maybe it's just a little acid influx. You don't go through the testing, but because it's already been reported, you find out that you have a damaged heart. They can't report that. So a large underreporting factor. Onset latency was a big thing, and it was a big thing inside of the what do they call it? The post-marketing experience for the Pfizer data that came out a couple of years ago. It was big in that as well.
You also have clinical effects that will accumulate over time, because somebody will say, well, it's only a little bit of scarring on the heart tissue regenerate. Well, a little bit of scarring from one jab, and then what about a little bit more? And you may not notice it. It may not be at a point that is noticed to be reported, but the damage is still there. Therefore, again, the underreporting is much higher than what we even know.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that McCullough said too, or very early on, was that there is no such thing as mild myocarditis. There is no such thing as mild heart inflammation. Any heart inflammation is dangerous, needs to be taken very seriously. And there's anyone who would describe heart inflammation as a mild, or like, make it come off as like it's just it's a little inconvenience, they're not being honest with you.
Well, and then there's an even larger factor that goes into this, because if you looked at it, dementia was one of the conditions that put people in a higher risk category. How well do people with dementia communicate? Can they tell you when something's really troubling them? And if you get away from the people that with dementia, when they started giving this to children, how many kids can communicate that they have a sore chest or some of the other symptoms of myocarditis from the ages of 6 months to, let's call it, 3 years old? Children aren't very good communicators, and especially with new parents aren't that good. Now, I'm not saying that parents are bad and they wouldn't recognize the symptoms, but even if the parent took a colicky child into the doctor would give them something for that, but not attribute it to the vaccines, and may not attribute it to the actual condition that's going on. And that's what I find the most troubling, is you're now giving this stuff to people that can't communicate if they're having a bad reaction, while there's absolutely no benefit for them and only 100% risk.
That part was unforgivable for me. That I can't. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt and understand that people behave poorly when they're fearful for their for their life, or for their health, or their family's health. But no, for the people who should have known better, the how actively the government and medical governing bodies pushed these vaccines on children, that makes me, I try not to get upset about this kind of stuff, but it makes me very upset.
Makes me very upset. Closing them out of parks, letting them go through 2 years of pandemic before you give them a vaccine, where they've, their risk was so small it couldn't even be calculated. And again, this came from Israel, and as related to Pfizer, and the study literally said no healthy person under the age of 50 has died from COVID. No healthy person under the age of 50. Inside of Canada, we could show that basically no healthy child, especially no healthy child under the age of 18, has died from COVID. There's absolutely zero reason that these vaccines should have been pushed into children. The AstraZeneca was actually late in coming out. So while Canada considers Moderna and Pfizer as having come out on, I believe it was December 14th, 2020, only 8 people got the jab that day. So they weren't really out in full swing. But they were out and available in December. So call it January when they started rolling out the Pfizer and the Moderna. It wasn't until February, the end of February, that the AstraZeneca's got approved inside of Canada. By May, so they're approved in February. Let's call it mid-March, before they're starting to make it into people's muscles, right? By May, so March, April, May, 2.5 months later, 2 Canadian provinces had already pulled AstraZeneca. While not reporting any they just said, maybe we just don't want to use these anymore. By July 5th, Canada was tossing out half of the doses that remained. Right? And I think it was by June or July, we basically just stopped using the jabs. Now, what's kind of troubling about that is, I don't know if I have this on here, is the WHO recommendations on this were to give a booster may be considered every 4 to 6 months. Inside of Canada, they never started talking about booster jabs until September. Keeping in mind that by July or by June, whatever, we were throwing out more AstraZeneca than we were putting in people's arms. And that 2.3 million got their first AstraZeneca vaccine, but only 500,000 potentially got their second, right? Like, that's how bad it was on the AstraZeneca side of things. But the WHO was giving out these recommendations for 4 to 6 months. The vaccines weren't around long enough to even be talking about boosters. The clinical trial data only shows dose 1 and dose 2. Where the fuck are they getting recommendations that you can just take as many of these things as willy-nilly as you'd like to? And then how did people inside of Canada get up to 4 jabs of AstraZeneca if we basically stopped using them by July, and vaccination or booster shots weren't being given until September of the same year? 2 months later is when people started getting the booster shots. People in Canada have up to 4 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccines. And I'd like to know how that happened.
4 doses in 2021, and it wasn't even a full year of it being around. That's a lot.
Well,
like
it is a lot. And I don't know if it happened or if somebody was just holding on to a bunch inside of a freezer and let them expire. I don't know how that happened, but I don't know how we got to 4 doses on something. Even if the WHO says it, there's zero clinical data that states that this has been tested in more than 2 jabs in 20,000 people.
Sheldon, can you scroll up a little bit to that one note? Yeah, right there. The benefits of booster vaccination are recognized following increasing evidence of waning vaccine effectiveness against mild and asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection over time. That sentence is ridiculous on so many levels. Like, where do you even begin with how stupid that sentence is? Like, first of all, how do you... Well, take it away. How stupid is that sentence, Sheldon?
Well, no, it is. See, because the one thing that they've ignored throughout this entire thing is that we have an immune system, so there is natural immunity. The second thing is when they finally realized that, and this was too by, I think it was May, March, the breakthrough cases were starting to come through inside of the United States. They were already free flowing in Israel from the data. By May, they couldn't even contain that the jabs don't stop COVID. And so we'd already knew that. Now, people still deny that to this day. And they say, oh, no, they're not perfect. No, they never worked. They never, ever worked. And then people say, well, no, we never said it was going to stop COVID. And you say, well, then why do you call it a breakthrough case instead of an expected case of COVID following vaccination? Yeah. But now there's no actual vaccine immunity from any of the jabs. None of these things can claim actual immunization. They call it something called hybrid immunization, which means if you got the jab, in order for you to be immune to COVID, you still have to catch COVID, right? The whole thing doesn't make sense. The benefits of a booster, and again, when we started to go through some of the clinical data from Pfizer, you really had to wonder about that. And when you start to look at some of the data that follows the 3rd and 4th jab, even from the Health Canada standpoint, and then when we went through the canvas, which basically stated, if you've damaged your immune system with the jab and you've damaged your immune system with COVID, then each subsequent jab adds a higher risk of more adverse events while still not stopping you from catching COVID.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't stop you from catching COVID, and they'll talk about myocarditis and they'll try to give the examples of unvaccinated and myocarditis, and they'll try to lift that up as its own example. The thing is, the risk from a jab, it's not just, you still have COVID. So you have that whatever baseline risk of myocarditis in addition to each jab. So it's not a or situation, it's an and situation, because it's not preventing you from getting COVID anyways. So I don't see why people are unable to comprehend this. You're still getting it. The risk is compounding.
Yeah, if this was a big factor in 2020, we would have heard about myocarditis and pericarditis in 2020. It wasn't.
Yeah.
They only started talking about that in 2021 when the jabs rolled out. And that's when people started saying, well, no, COVID causes myocarditis. COVID can cause heart damage as well. But no, it's exactly what you said. So why would I take something that potentially gives me heart damage that offers me no protection for a virus that could also cause further heart damage? There's no logic to it.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
you
if
know,
you're worried
we're-
about, sorry, Sheldon, if you're worried about boosters for waning protection against asymptomatic COVID, what you need is a shrink more than you need a vaccine. I think that's
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing is the asymptomatic portion of it. Again, none of it made sense. And we see what they're trying to do with the bird flu now, because asymptomatic has been mentioned in the bird flu. But you know, they talk about, you know, what happens with the bird flu is you get conjunctivitis. And what that literally is pink eye.
sounds scarier when it's conjunctivitis.
And that's exactly it. Because, you know, if you've been around a cat as a kid or a gerbil or, you know, whatever, you probably had pink eye and you got over it with, you know, nothing. But now they're really ramping up this H5N1 bird flu vaccine, another mRNA jab. And they're really trying to scare people. And I think that's, you know, because we're coming into the US elections that they need something, man. They need a story.
I wish it was 2001 again when nobody got flu. You remember that? Remember when just no one got flu in 2021?
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. So many things that go on with these things. So basically, yeah, that's you know, I talked to Regina
really good breakdown
about going through the presentation, and I was going to have her onto a chat, and I think we discussed that too. And then she said, "Listen, I just don't have time to go through this, and if I do, I need to be a lot more thorough." So I just thought, well, you know what, I can take a couple hours and just kind of whip something together. So that literally just came up in just a couple of hours worth of you know, assembling what I'd seen initially, and is there more to it? There probably is. I mean, somebody will probably mention, you know, there's more that I could be looking at in these things, but I think this gives kind of an idea. Is, you know, there really was no protection. People still got COVID. People still died. They didn't want to attribute any adverse events to the vaccines. Yet, from February to basically May, you know, February when they were approved, so March, April, May, 3 months, when they started being pulled inside of other countries before they were pulled in the province of Alberta, 3 months, and they don't want to associate any of the adverse events while they were completely basically shut out of the market. This data, they'd held off on this. I mean, because they were in a court case. That was one. They're being sued inside of Europe. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to retract their license to sell the product. And in order to do that, they had to post their clinical data. So this is their clinical data. You know, it'll go down the books, most likely saying as, you know, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't that effective, or there wasn't enough call for it. Whatever that looks like, just like we've seen from the Legacy News, there wasn't enough call for the AstraZeneca jabs, and that's why it wasn't the most updated vaccines that we can get. Okay, so what is the most updated vaccines that we can get? You know, it's the XBB.1.5, where when it was released in September of 2023, only 5% of the cases of COVID inside of Canada were XBB.1.5. XBB.1.5 had already run its course in Canada and was basically extincting itself to other variants. If you believe all the bullshit that they say. So literally anything that anybody's taking right now, you know, they say, well, it's better than nothing. Well, how is it better than nothing? You know, you're taking an archaic vaccine for an archaic variant, unless you believe that XBB 1.1.5 is going to make a resurgence, you know?
Well, and they'd have you believe too that, you know, well, what's the purpose of it? Well, and then they'll say, well, you know, it can't hurt. Well, but maybe it can, you know, maybe this isn't the only medical intervention in history with zero side effects. You know, the people want you to believe that, or, the people who are still pushing these things want you to believe that, you know, don't worry about it. There's nothing that can go wrong. Well, that would make it the first medical intervention in history where nothing could go wrong. So people need to be a little bit more realistic about that.
Yeah, and I do the same thing. People were shocked to see how many. Only publish Canadian statistics. With the exception of this, most of the studies were conducted in the United States. I think it was Chile and someplace else. But everything that I've busted out up to this point in Canada through my Substack, through Twitter, predominantly, it's statistics posted by Health Canada or by the province of Alberta. I've done a little bit of BC, some of the other provinces too, just, quick looks. But people are actually shocked to see how many people have been injured by the jabs, and they still say the same line. Well, if you look at how many million people that got the jabs, or how many billion people got the jabs, 54,000 doesn't seem like a big number. Well, that's 54,000 taking a lot of other factors into consideration. And there weren't billions of doses inside of Canada. And you don't know anything about what's going on inside of other countries. You don't even know what's going on inside of your own country. Don't fucking tell me that you know what's going on in other countries that have high vaccination rates with Pfizer or Moderna, or in the UK with the AstraZeneca. Yeah. Confirmation bias is huge with people. They pick up on the one thing that they like to see and they run with it.
Yeah, and it's
the way that you broke this.
Sorry, go ahead.
The way that you broke this down, you're pointing out all the places where, okay, well, this makes it more muddy. Why is this number used? Why? And this is painting a case where it's not by accident that you have a study that's so poorly constructed. It's critically flawed in more than a few ways, and yet people still talk about these things with certain, like there's certainty in their voice when they're talking about, well, we know it's not this, we know it's not that, and we're hoping that that maybe we can make some short clips out of this and some bite-sized kind of explorations of some of the things that we highlighted today. Because look at it in the way that you broke it down, it's pretty clear that it's a total clusterfuck.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sheldon, but I don't think that you're a immunologist. I don't think that you're a epidemiologist or a medical journalist.
Yeah.
What's that?
Or a virologist.
Or any sort of, you don't have any sort of professional credentials behind your name. Yet in a few hours you were able to compile that and show what a complete load of nonsense the whole thing is. So why haven't I heard a single peep of this from any of our state media, any of our respected medical officials in the country? Like, why does that seems weird to me, doesn't it?
Well, even if you go to the alternate media sources, I mean, the one thing that they seem to only highlight, it was like 1 out of 64 or 1 out of 67 people was injured by the vax, and everybody was like, "Ooh, that's pretty bad." But again, this was 117 pages of PDF that was put out by AstraZeneca. Who's going to go through 117 pages? And the second side of that is because AstraZeneca was used for such a small percentage of time. Remember, like 3-4 months inside of Canada before it was completely eliminated. We're checking the shit out. Everybody looked at it the same way. Well, it's AstraZeneca, wasn't used that much, probably didn't cause that much. Why would I look at 117 fucking pages and drill this thing out? It's math, it's charts, it's boring. I don't know what all the medical terms are, but I'm sure anybody that sat down with these things would have sat down and if given enough time, would have said, like, this just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that would be anybody that's ever used a calculator or ever done math in school. You don't have to understand a lot. I don't think you have to understand a lot to see what we're seeing here, do you?
No, and that's the thing. You just have to have the ethical, the backbone to actually want to do that. You have to have the curiosity to actually want to sit down and figure this out. And it just doesn't seem that our institutions really have that curiosity.
Well, our institutions, or like you said, our media, they're the ones that are funded by the pharmaceutical companies. All of our healthcare, or a good portion of our healthcare, is. So they can't say anything about their paycheck. We'd seen what happens to the doctors that do talk up about this stuff. And, again, I'm going to come back to this Calgary event. Like, this is why I think it's absolutely so important why I'm promoting the hell out of this Calgary Injection of Truth event, because it's the first time that any political party, any political leader, any elected official has invited, a few doctors that can come and speak to this exact same thing, as well as have witness impact statements from people that were injured by the vaccines, because, maybe some of these things are causal. Maybe.
Well, I don't know how it could be. I kept seeing zeros everywhere, Sheldon. So I don't think it could be.
But see, that's that's the other side of things is people that had zero risk of dying from COVID think that the jabs saved their life. Yeah. But you say, well, people that took the jabs had an injury. And they say, well, no, correlation doesn't equal causation. You say, well, then how can you correlate the jabs to saving your life? How did they save your life if you were at zero risk to begin with? Yeah. It's been a really stupid topic for 3, and there's still so many people that are just really caught in the weeds on this. And I think the more egregious of an assholes they were to the unvaccinated with the rhetoric is the more that they have to cling on to this because they don't want to admit how fucking terrible of a person they actually are.
Yeah. Yeah. The cognitive dissonance is real with those guys.
That's it. Guys, we busted this out for about 2.5 hours. I know everybody's probably got to go for a pee break or something here pretty quick, but was that kind of what you were looking at when we talked about a collab on a stream? I mean, that was a pretty good time.
I think so. I think that was more than what we thought, honestly. What do you think, James?
I didn't expect to unpack such a, I don't know, that did going through it line by line. I really like that. So I enjoyed this breakdown.
I was actually thinking, Sheldon, if I'm honest, that it would sort of be a little bit like, so what do you do for work? What's your tell us about your family, a little bit of that. And no, but actually it's like, well, 40 out of 50,062 people. It was a lot more statistical, but maybe we'll have the more casual one as our second interview.
Yeah, those are always good too. I just thought, you know what? I had to do this anyways. Seemed like a good opportunity.
I loved it. I learned a lot.
So going into close, was there any other questions? There any other things that you had that you'd like to ask, or any points that you'd like covered, or close off with anything?
I think that pretty much covers everything.
Yeah, we
mostly
we wrapped it, right?
Well, for what we addressed so far, I think it's just hopefully we can get some eyes on this. That's all I'm hoping for. So
yeah. That's you put a lot of work into this, and I hope this is useful for people, because it's like you said, as soon as you lay eyes on the numbers, you can see, and it just takes that little bit of, if you put it in front of somebody, maybe that's what it will take for them to start having some follow-up questions and doing a little bit more research, and maybe going to that event in Calgary. Maybe you should plug that event in Calgary. What's the details on that?
I can probably get that into.
Let's put you on the spot there.
They're sold out of regular tickets, but there is still some what do they call it? Politics and popcorn, and they're a little bit more expensive. What is this? So yeah, I'll post the link in the chat here, so you can go to this location, and that should show up in the streams. Yeah, there it is. Sweet. Yeah, so there is, and there's a number of great speakers that are going to be at this thing. Who did we have? I know that was, David Speaker's definitely coming out, and Eric Payne, Macus, Chris Shoemaker, Jessica Rose, and Brian Bridle. So some really good
powerful lineup. Yeah,
it is. So if you can't get into Calgary, if the tickets seem a little bit expensive, when I talked to Eric last, he said that he had 16 CAs that are already running streaming parties. So they're people that are either booking a section at a restaurant or a bar like we did. I know one of my friends in Ponoka, Bonnie Mielke. She's renting out the town hall of Ponoka and is basically blanket inviting everybody to come out to this thing. So, I mean, like I said, if you can't make it out to the event, run a streaming event, run the stream for yourselves and just check out the information that's going to be there. I want to be there in person because I want to meet some of these guys. I talked to David Speaker. I've talked about some of these guys. I've followed these people. Not to mention there's supposed to be a few more UPC or UCP MLAs there. Hopefully a couple of the NDPs. Hopefully a couple of people that have been injured and start to get a grasp on exactly what's happened to them. Because that's a big part of the conversation. And I have another thing that I am going to be doing for the injection of truth. I just can't talk about it right now. But I am going to be presenting something, and I think it's going to be pretty big. Because once the information's out, and it's already getting out, I think it's time to start forcing some hands. So I'm going to be working on something over the next couple of weeks. Until it's ready, I'm not going to talk about it.
I like it.
Yeah, can't wait for the reveal.
Cool stuff. All right. Well, guys, it was great seeing you again. Great meeting you. Great conversation this evening. We'll have to do this again sometime. Find a topic of conversation when it's not so much data and boring bullshit. When it's not so black. And we'll talk about family and drinking beers and stuff.
Hell yeah. Well, really appreciate you having us, man. This was awesome. And really looking forward to the next one too.
Yeah. Sounds good.
It's great to sit down.
All right, you guys have a fantastic evening. And I hope, thanks everybody for being so patient with us for however many people lasted throughout the entire stream. Of course, I'd like to thank the viewers, and I hope you got something out of it. And if you haven't found the links to download the presentation, you'll find it in my Substack. You'll find it on Twitter, and you'll also find it on my YouTube channel attached to this video. So thanks a lot for coming out, and have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.